Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sacred Sounds, Reflections on Alice Coltrane. My name is Naya Jenwright, and I'm the curatorial assistant for the exhibition Alice Coltrane Monument Eternal. Today, we're honored to host a full-day symposium dedicated to the life, music, and spiritual legacy of Alice Coltrane. Throughout the day, you'll experience a series of screenings, lectures, and conversations led by distinguished scholars and artists. We'll take a lunch break around 1:30 and reconvene at 2:30. Our incredible roster of presenters includes Erin Christovale, leader of Monument Eternal. Can we get a clap? Cauleen Smith, artist and professor at UCLA. Robin D.G. Kelley, professor at UCLA. Lauren de Graf, writer, producer, and scholar. Timothy Anne Burnside, museum professional at the Smithsonian. Jason King, dean of the USC Thornton School of Music. Harmony Holliday, writer, scholar, and artist. Aja Burrell Wood, managing director for Berklee's Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice. And Courtney Bryan, pianist and composer. At the close of the day, we'll be treated to a special performance by Sine Woods, one of the artists featured in the exhibition. So we hope that you'll stay with us for that. We also have a few short documentaries to show from our video team with some of the artists at the end of the show, which will be great. Be sure to also visit our bookstore where you'll find the exhibition catalog and Monument Eternal written by Alice Coltrane and a bunch of other goodies. Also, mark your calendars. Erin Christovale will be giving her final tour on May 4th at 1 p.m. And thank you again for being here. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Erin Christovale. Erin Christovale is a Los Angeles-based film programmer and curator at the Hammer Museum. She is the co-founder of the international experimental film program Black Radical Imagination, which is screened in spaces such as MoMA PS1 in New York and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. Exhibitions organized by Christovale include Awake in the Water, Meditations on Disaster in 2014 at the Museum of Contemporary African Diasporan Arts in New York, Memoirs of a Watermelon Woman and a Subtle Likeness, both in 2016 at One National Gay and Lesbian Archives in Los Angeles, and Selection, Democracy, Citizenship, Freedom in 2016 at Los Angeles Municipal Art Gallery, where she previously served as a curator. During her time at the Hammer, she's organized numerous exhibitions, including the critically acclaimed Made in LA 2018 with Anne Elgood, No Humans Involved in 2021, the retrospective Ulysses Jenkins Without Your Interpretation with Meg Onley, and of course, Alice Coltrane Monument Eternal, which is on view until May 4th. Her curatorial projects have been covered in Art Forum, the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, and she's been profiled in publications including Time and Essence, and featured on KCET. She was awarded the New Leadership Award by Art Table in 2020, and she completed the Curatorial Center for Leadership at the Studio Museum in Harlem from 2021 to 2023. She's also an advisor of the African American History Initiative at the Getty Research Institute. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Erin.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really grateful to see you all here. Today is going to be a really beautiful day of honoring and celebrating the life and legacy of Alice Coltrane. And as Naya just mentioned, we have some incredible scholars, artists, and museum professionals that will be in conversation, showing films, and presenting on various aspects of Alice. I wanted to just also point out that Alice's daughter, Michelle Coltrane, is here. So I just wanted to give her flowers. And she was such an incredible support and really one of the main reasons why this exhibition happened. So I'm grateful to her. And, since we will be yapping all day, I thought, why not start off the day with the poem? So this poem is entitled An Ode to Alice. This is not an exhibition. It is an ode, an homage, an honoring of the Most High A.C. Turiya Sangeetananda, and perhaps a collection of objects and makers in concert. Like the acoustic paintings of Jenny C. Jones, austere in presentation, wrapped in a menagerie of gray, running the gamut of sound and silence, or the hornbeam effigy of Jamal Cyrus, silver horn affixed to the cross like a martyr, beam flanked by the buried bones of the blues, or the punkish mark-making of Jasper Marcellus and the endless event series of manic mics and muted disco balls, or the weighted black and white keys of Gosier Ogini embodying an intergenerational essence of familial players, or Ephraim Asili's filmic fever dream, where harpist glissandos run circles around titular tracking shots in the bowels of a dim-lit studio, or the glitched still life of Leslie Hewitt, a liminal space where jazzed algorithms time travel between seashell and tattered tambourine, or Cauleen Smith's cinematic pilgrimage to utopia, washed with glimpses of an ashram held in the space of the past, present, and future. Or Star Felice's Siren of Oblivion, wailing out frequencies into the ether, cracked in clay and encased by a sacred ancestral vessel. Or Rashid Johnson's burned oak altar of Journey and Satchidananda, smudged in shea butter and dripping in wax a la vinyl. Or Nikita Gale's synthesized calcite planted on a hotbed of digital devices that warp and weft into each other's sonic sequencing. Or the lasered semiotic loop of Nicole Miller's shape-shifting star signs for Turiya. Or the sonic sanctuary of Stephen Ellison, whose sermonic reverberations of Turiya Sangeetananda rumble through the body, washed in orange bliss. Or the star-studded stage of Giovanna Gonzalez, complete with stained glass lunar loops, retro-orange ascension armature, and a rug reminiscent of Patah el Daoud. Or Bethany Collins' anthemic 10-part circular score, Battle Hymn of the Republic, providing context clues and historical records of our country's checkered past. Or Martine Sims' sprawling text and image exploration of defunct ashram fixtures and meditative compositions that collectively attempt to lead us from the unreal to the real. Or Shayla Miller's Heavenly Father, a series of black and white prints affixed with the non-linear sensibilities of grief, grace, and godliness. Or In This Day in Meditation with Sine Woods, whose makeshift ashram provides respite and relief behind beaded curtains. Or A.D. Roberson's crystallized cosmogram that, when activated, sends sonic chakras through the cellular walls. Or Gather Light by Devin T. Mays, a melodic composition of fixtures that emit and emote layers of luminescence. Perhaps this is an exhibition and an ode and an honoring, but most importantly, a pining at the potential of a monument eternal. Thank you.
What you just saw was Cauleen Smith's film Sojourner. Set to the iconic and spiritual music of Alice Coltrane, Turiya Sangeetananda, Smith's film Sojourner travels across the U.S. to visit a series of sites important to an alternative and creative narrative of Black history. While the approach may appear spiritual, it's more futuristic than religious. Smith is interested in using the individual stories of those who have formed their own solutions as a reconstructive and healing lens for considering the past. These individuals include, in addition to Coltrane, Rebecca Cox Jackson, Simon Rodia, and Noah Purifoy. The film ends with a feminist reimagining of a 1966 photograph by Billy Ray at the Watts Towers, with a group of men listening to the radio. The radio is a prop used throughout the film, transmitting words of critique, inspiration, and philosophy that serve as a voiceover for the film, and an act of shared and collective listening in various scenes. So now, speaking about this film is Cauleen Smith and Robin D.G. Kelley. Smith was raised in Sacramento, California, and lives in Los Angeles. She's also a faculty in the UCLA School of Arts and Architecture. Smith holds a BA in Creative Arts from San Francisco State University and an MFA from the UCLA School of Theater and Film and Television. Smith is a recipient of numerous grants and awards, including a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Joyce Alexander Wine Artist Prize, Ellsworth Kelly Award, the Herb Alpert Award in the Arts, and a Rauschenberg Residency. Smith's works have been featured in solo exhibitions at institutions such as the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, LACMA, Whitney Museum of American Art in New York, Institute of Contemporary Art in Philadelphia, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, among many others. Her work is included in many public collections such as the Art Institute of Chicago, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Museum of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, Studio Museum in Harlem, Smithsonian Museum of American Art, and the Whitney Museum of American Art. Next, Robin D.G. Kelley is a distinguished professor and Gary B. Nash Endowed Chair in U.S. History at UCLA. His books include Hammer and Hoe, Alabama Communists During the Great Depression, Freedom Dreams, The Black Radical Imagination, Race Rebels, Culture, Politics, in the Black Working Class, Yo Mama's Dysfunctional, Fighting the Culture Wars in Urban America, Africa Speaks, America Answers, Modern Jazz and Revolutionary Times, Thelonious Monk, The Life and Times of an American Original, and Black, Brown, and Beige, Surrealist Writings from Africa and the African Diaspora, co-edited with Franklin Rosemont. Kelley is currently completing 2 books, Making a Killing, Cops, Capitalism, and the War on Black Life, and The Education of Miss Grace Halsell, An Intimate History of the American Century. His essays have appeared in dozens of publications, including The Nation, New York Times, New York Review of Books, Hammer and Hope, New Labor Forum, American Quarterly, Black Scholar, Dissent, Counterpunch, Journal of Palestine Studies, Monthly Review, Radical History Review, Rethinking Marxism, and the Boston Review, for which he also serves as a contributing editor. Please join me in welcoming these two.
Hi, everyone.
Good morning. I just found out we have 30 minutes, right?
Oh, okay.
30 minutes, so we're going to be quick. I would like cut the bio.
No, that took all the time.
Okay, so well, we'll get right into it. So we don't have time for questions from the audience, do we? Well, we'll find out. Because I'm very excited. I could talk to you for like hours. Hours.
I'm so excited too.
Hours. And I'm actually gonna, I have billions of questions, but I just want to begin at the beginning. In fact, I think I've seen this film was part of Give It or Leave It.
Yes.
Yes, which is a spectacular installation piece. But what I want to do is sort of begin at the beginning, and that is, I have a lot of impressions and personal connections, but I want you to explain to us, like, your journey to this project, your journey to Alice Coltrane, your sojourn, as it were, to this particular film. And you might want to connect it to Pilgrim, which is part of the exhibition.
How did it start? Well, it was 2 things kind of converging. One was finding the album Eternity in Chicago, picking it up and being like, Alice, I don't listen to enough of this. So I took it home and dropped the needle, and this song, Om Supreme, comes on. I'd only lived in Chicago a couple of months. I'd moved there from San Diego. First song, they start chanting California over and over again. I was like, okay, This is wild. I'm loving this. And the sound of the music was confusing me in the sense that what Alice Coltrane was doing at that moment, it's still so startling to me, was to bring together three strains of musical practice into like an original sound. And I was thinking about that, like this gospel, this bebop, and these Vedic ragas, right? And you could feel them kind of like circulating around each other, and that was blowing my mind. And I still love those early compositions of hers where you can feel her pulling them together, and it hasn't sort of like fully like purified and coalesced into her sound. I love that. And then there was this strange obsession that I had with shaker drawings, gift drawings, which are these visionary drawings that teenage girls in the middle 1800s in this cult of the Shakers would receive from their ancestors and draw and then give to others. This is in a community where visual culture is forbidden. So these drawings were forbidden, and yet they produced this revival of the whole Shaker movement. These girls would draw these very strange objects in their drawings, often labeled heavenly musical instruments. And it would be like, it looked like a spinning wheel with a snake and a plant. It's just bizarre machines. And then I got deeper into Alice Coltrane and read Monument Eternal, which is startling. Everyone should read this book. But when she starts talking about traveling through astral planes, she describes instruments that can play themselves. And suddenly there was this convergence between the Shakers, who were this, what I would call like a legitimate utopian, attempt at a utopian community from the 19th century, this direct link between these teenage white girls in Troy, New York, drawing these pictures, and Alice Coltrane's astral projections, that they agreed on this idea of sound. And to me, that meant something. And I just started trying to figure it out. That's how I learned about Rebecca Cox Jackson, a black Shaker Eldris, and her partner, Rebecca Perot. And then I just started trying to figure out, like, how many creative, spiritual people produce spaces, not just for themselves, but others. And that's how the film Pilgrim came about, was visiting different sites, and then this more attempt at a deeper study or kind of embodying of those ideas in Sojourner. Right. Yeah.
But you're also visiting sites here.
I am.
And you may want to talk to folks about some of those sites, whether it's John Coltrane's home, whether it's Rebecca Cox Jackson's place, where, in Philadelphia, whether it's North Purefoy's beautiful kind of landscape. I have other questions, but just talking about like your passageway, the choices you made, even in Chicago with my people there, like Barbara Ransby and others, like how did you connect those as kind of traveling across the United States in many ways?
Right. Both through research and experience, and serendipitous experience. So Barbara Ramsey being this really crucial activist in Chicago, proposing, and I kind of stumbled on her as well. I knew who she was. I was reading her book as Londa about Paul Robeson's book, and then I was like, oh, this is the same woman, this woman who's talking about Freedom City in Chicago. And she's making this startling proposal about what this city that I love, Chicago, could be. And just out there in the street, kind of with this intergenerational coalition of different activist groups, just literally just trying to talk to people. And I asked them, because I wanted something in this film, I wanted something that connected it to the now and the present. So I asked Dr. Ransby, would you let me like bring these banners that I made to your protest, and maybe people could hold them or we could hang them up? She's like, what are they? I told her about this quote that is a blessing and a proposal from Taria, which was like, at dawn, sit at the feet of action at noon. Okay. I gave her this quote, and she was like, yeah, that works. That completely, and that's like, to me, was so important, Robin, was this idea that these activists who are doing like the real policy work on the street and in institutions could kind of accept and make space for, embrace, and even wrap themselves around this proposal from this visionary woman, the Swamini Turiya, that there was not even like a second of hesitation or confusion about this proposal, or really a blessing from God, being like a directive that could propel their group, or fortify their group while they do this work on the streets. So that just seemed like the heart of the movie once it happened.
Yes, the word that kept coming to me, having watched it about 10 times now, is oneness. Oneness. You think about the connection to Rebecca Cox Jackson, the Shakers, to Alice Coltrane, is one God, right? Oneness in terms of Chicago being the home that Sun Ra created after leaving Birmingham,
Right.
And Sun Ra's connection to all that music, which is also part of what you observe. I think about what it meant for Alice Coltrane to play a Wurlitzer, which, Courtney's one of the few people who know like how hard that instrument is. Like, because that bass you hear that's her foot pedals, right? And so you've got this instrument with three layers, like three sort of steps of keys, and about 4 dozen buttons on the side, and she's making this beautiful music. It's a kind of oneness of that. And the Wurlitzer is designed to be like, it's designed, it could be an ensemble instrument, but it's also designed to be like a solo instrument where you're basically a whole
the
orchestra.
orchestra, yeah.
And she does that. And I love the choices you made. The closing song, also from Eternity, Spiritual, Eternal, which again, oneness. Alice Coltrane had this many lives but one life, and that one life is a life that combines the gospel, her gospel roots in Detroit, her bebop, jazz, devotional music, and you're right, it's like all there at the same time. And that is, and again, Courtney understands this, musicians who come out that tradition always recognized the oneness of all that music. Whether it's Duke Ellington or Monk, Alice Coltrane, they're like, music is one. Randy Weston used to say it all the time, Exactly. And I just think you beautifully captured that. I don't want to talk too much, but I do want to ask you something else, which struck me as well. Travel. I love that passage from Monument Eternal that you chose: when you travel around the earth in your spirit body without the use of machines, you actually stand on air and travel faster than the speed of thought. And what is the speed of thought?
Wow.
So tell me the connection between your own exploration of Alice Coltrane's ideas in that text and how you made it visual.
It was actually a really long process. When I read Monument Eternal, I was just kind of shook. So then I read it again, and I copied by hand the passages that were really messing with me, and I hung them up in my little tiny studio. And that was pretty much all that was there for months, just these little pieces of paper hanging on the wall of her quotes. And then it was literally like this process of letting things like arrive that were visual or physical or little locations that could help me sort of track this process that she went through with these austerities. That's what she's describing, this series of austerities that leads her to become like a female godhead. And like I'm reading about this, and then the Shakers, who had been this tangential thing, like I didn't really know how I fit into that history until I learned about Rebecca Cox Jackson, this Black woman who spent time with the Shakers, started an urban Shaker commune for domestic women, Black women, in the city of Philadelphia, and argued with the Shakers, and was disappointed and frustrated with them. One of the women that she argued with was one of the girls who made a lot of those drawings, and I just felt like it's just like meeting you or meeting anybody, the way that we're all connected. Like I just felt like there was this relationship that between these women who needed to make space, not just for themselves, but for someone else. And also the making of that space actually came through the difficulties of their lives. Like Mother Ann Lee, who started the Shakers. This is a woman who had 4 miscarriages. Um, um, I don't think it's a mistake that then she starts a religion in which there's no sex. None. No sex is had. I don't think that's a mistake. I think that's about a kind of autonomy of the body, a kind of protection of the body that she has to make. Alice Coltrane loses like an actual spiritual soulmate, the physical, she loses the physical incarnation of that soulmate, and then has to find a way to stay with them, and that's through the process of becoming like spiritually evolved and enlightened, so that this communication, this creative journey, this spiritual journey can be maintained. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I don't know, I still don't know how to make a picture of that or to make a film of that. But I felt like Rebecca Cox Jackson, this Shaker woman, who then has like a mentee, like a student, an apprentice, a twin, a soulmate also, like that who becomes her after she dies. Like I felt like all of these women were trying to teach me something. Even the teenage girls making the drawings, the illicit drawings that they weren't supposed to make, that everybody still loved. Like, you know what I mean? I feel like they were all trying to teach me something. And so that's why the film is called Sojourner or Pilgrim, because I was just I was in my own process of study with them.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers
Oh
your
no,
question.
of course it more than answers the question. Back just for people who don't know, I mean, Rebecca Cox Jackson, born in 1795 to free black family, died I think 1871 if I remember correctly, and so it mentions she lived through a really critical moment of the kind of high point of industrial, racial capitalism and slavery in the United States through Reconstruction, right? Through at least not the end of it, but she ends up passing in that really critical moment. And so she's living in this other period, and yet again, it connects directly politically and spiritually with the present, and also the present that you're identifying in the film. So I think you do that beautifully. The other thing, I actually wanted to say one more thing, but before that, a question just about the aesthetics of the film, because one of the things that it's hard not to notice is how the texture changes, right? You go from kind of grainy, almost archival type footage, Super 8, almost. And then those moments, and then you have these kind of moments of clarity. Then you have the most extraordinary images of the Watts Towers I've ever seen, because typically they're shot from the bottom looking up. And what you do is, I guess that's a drone, right? And you're descending from the heavens, as opposed to ascending descending from the heavens, and it's shot in such a way where it appears that they're rising. Of course you know that, right? And and from there we move to this extraordinary, beautiful, amazing, powerful group of women who are in some ways the opposite of the image of Billy Ray's image, right? Not so much the opposite, but something more transcendent. And their silence and their love for one another, in that, with bright colors, all that. It's like a suite. It's like 3-part suite for me.
It
So
is.
if you could talk about that.
Certainly. And also there are different groups of women too, right? But in my mind they're literally all one. And that going back to the one. The archival, what you're calling archival footage, is 16 millimeter film that I shoot when I visit sites with my Bolex. So I'm just winding up my little camera, and instead of using my iPhone to document things, I use the film because it slows me down. I have to make a decision. It's expensive. It's like $100 a pop, right? To like shoot film. So if I actually take the trouble of winding my camera and filming it, then I know that it's something I need to think about. Whereas with my phone, too much trash. I'll take a picture of a caterpillar, some dust lint, like, you know what I mean? Like, focus. The film helps me do that. I often don't use it, but in both of these projects, I ended up going back to it because of there was a kind of intimacy to it, like a kind of like unknowing. Like the camera never really rests. The camera is really unstable. That's me being a poor camera operator, but it's also the mode of looking of that. Then the drone and like going to Watts by the time I decided that Watts was a part of this, this had to do with my curiosity with this man, Simon Rodia, also someone who never spoke about why he made this amazing tribute, but what he did with that, and what, to my mind, it still is like a kind of currency that this community that has never enjoyed any kind of investment from the city of LA.
Right.
It's a kind of currency that they have. It's a kind of leverage that they have, a kind of cultural capital that this community has and still wields to a certain extent, given to them by this man who, by himself, in evenings and weekends, built this I don't know, miraculous
Right.
architectural object
Over many years.
and gifted it to the community. It literally says Nuestro Pueblo on it, our house, our town, not his, ours. And he literally gave it away. And I wanted like a close look, and I don't know if anybody's dealt with it, but it's not so easy to engage with the city park sometime. And the drone was the closest we could get. And then I realized when I was looking, I was like, oh, this coming, like I've never seen this part of the tower before. Like
Yeah,
you,
I've never seen it either.
you'd never seen it. And then there's the other kind of looking, which is me working with the women. Even the sort of verite stuff in Chicago with Dr. Ransby, everybody is aware. Everybody knows why I'm there. Everybody's helping me keep these banners up. Like everybody is collaborating with me to make these images. And the same thing happened in the desert, at Nora Purifoy's desert with the women, which I think of as like this incredibly generous collaboration with 12 or 13 young people I didn't really know until we got into the desert, except for Charlotte Braithwaite, who becomes like the anchor and the engine, and who I just couldn't bring myself to direct them. Like I had ideas about what I wanted to do, but the only thing I knew I needed was the reenactment of this Billy Ray photograph of these boys hanging out in the Watts Towers. And that had something to do with my always desire to revise these histories that were given, which are so male-centered. And so Billy Ray went into Watts with the directive of showing the seething, angry Negro that had and ended up hanging out with these boys who were helping him make photographs. So in his archive, didn't get into, or like these kids like pretending to throw Molotov cocktails and all the stuff that he staged, and they're showing up in like their best clothes, like it looks like a fashion shoot. They're like, oh, this guy wants to take pictures, life actually, like, so
They got dressed up for the riot.
they dressed like, yeah, you know what I mean? This is all after the riot, and it's a fiction that he's collaborating with them, like, you know what I mean? And it seems like maybe even the boys are directing it. So by the time you get to the Watts Tower image that he takes, that looks literally like a fashion spread, everybody's looking amazingly sharp and bright colors like red socks and ochre sweater. Like by the time you get to that, I feel like Billy Ray has just given up, and he's like, okay, let me just get this fabulous picture. You know what I mean? But what he never did while he was there, it was talk to any girls. Like he speaks to women, grown adult women who are the activists and the matriarchs of the community, and he photographs little girls playing. He never speaks to young women. Not a single image. It's actually shocking and strange. And so I really needed to remake that image, not because I didn't love what he made with those young men, but because there was like more love to give to like the idea of this sort of like collusion to like make something out of, like, you know what I mean?
Exactly. And it seemed like those kids, like you said, directed him. In other words, they brought something different, which opened up the pathway for you to see something that I think he didn't see. He couldn't have seen at the time.
Right.
And I think that's really striking, because one thing that all these artists have in common, including Noah Purifoy. Noah, for people who don't know, he not only was a great sculptor and everything, but he actually worked at the Watts Tower Art Center. He started it. I mean, he was teaching there, and 66 Signs of Neon is material that he and others had collected from the aftermath of the rebellion in '65 and turned into art. And so you draw this connection between the Watts Towers and then, of course, out in the desert. But the one thing that every single artist and every single figure, from Rebecca Cox Jackson to Alice Coltrane to Noah Purifoy to Simon Wood, and I would say yourself, they were driven by something greater than trying to make work. Something was driving them to make this work. And again, it's the force of the spirit that is embodied in every single thing that they did. I mean, Simon was not getting paid. He was just like finding objects and building and building and building, without any expectation of anything. And so that spirit. So in other words, this to be a sojourner is also be on a spiritual journey.
Completely. And this radical generosity, which Simon Rodia exhibits, Noah Furfoy exhibits, you can go out to the Desert Museum and be with his sculptures, not just look at them, but be with them, be in them. It's just there for you. And then when I visited the ashram and met Taria's students, again, they just received me and like embraced me and were so generous and kind to me as a visitor, as a curious visitor. You know what I mean? Obviously not. I'm a total heathen. So it was really clear that I was not on a spiritual journey, that I was like a looky-loo of some type. But I was so happy to be there, and that's what they...
How do you know?
Well, they asked me. They're like, so... I mean, they were like, so what are you doing here? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I was just eating juice and cookies with them after the service. And they were like, you gotta, like, just cough it up. Really, what are you doing here? You know what I mean? Because I wasn't asking any questions about, like, ideas. I was just standing there grinning, eating juice and cookies. Like, I can't believe I'm here. You know what I mean? So all of that generosity of all of that is so very much also a question, an ongoing question for me about how do you manifest that? Can art do that? Can films do that? What can do that?
Right.
You know what I
That's
mean?
the intersection also of Black feminism.
Absolutely.
And
100%. Like, yes.
How much time do we have? 5 minutes? Okay. I'm going to say one little thing, and then maybe we could take one question. I just want to say that and we talked about this, earlier. I was so moved by the story you tell because, in many ways, Turia's experience is like my mother's. My mother, by the way, she changed her name to Ananda. She's a follower of Paramahansa Yogananda from the time when I was like 3 years old. And so I grew up it's not the same guru, but she kind of, moved to California in 1971 on her own spiritual quest. And that's how we end up getting here. And she listened to John Coltrane and Alice Coltrane. She listened to that music, but it wasn't like exactly the same path, but in many ways it's similar. She was a single mother with 3 kids and ended up with 4, and trying to make ends meet. But I grew up in Harlem with the Bhagavad Gita, in my house. I think I was about the only one on the block that had that, So that so watching your film and like listening to music and be kind of, it returned a lot of things to me in terms of my own experience here. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, but I think that's actually important historically, like this late 60s to mid 70s. It was another Black migration,
Yes.
which was a spiritual quest west, which it was about seeking not in so much economic opportunity, but expansion, human expansion that happened then that I think is like actually something to note. You know what I mean?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. We got 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Does want to take at least one question? Yes.
Excellent project, by the way. Is there any way that you can? I got a couple comments, and it also can you get a copy of this anyplace?
It might end up being free to view online, but it isn't right now.
Okay, no problem.
I'm working on it.
Comment today is the 126th birthday of Duke Ellington.
That's right. April 29th.
Also, it was interesting the intersection. Not intersection, but Alice Coltrane, sister, Marilyn
Yeah.
McLeod, I think.
Yeah, Miracle.
Both from Motown.
Right.
I mean, they came out of the same
Yeah.
place. I mean, the music they both were just phenomenal. And
Yes.
enough is not known about them being even sisters.
Exactly. And could I add one more thing to that? Her half-brother, Ernie Farrell, was one of the greatest bassists to come out of Detroit, period. And I think that when we talk about the kind of suffering that she dealt with in that period, 1969 was when her brother died of drowning. And it was a great loss. I mean, he was like Horace Tapscott in the sense that he made a choice to stay in Detroit to raise his family rather than go to New York. And he played with everyone, Yusuf Lateef. And I just want to raise him because, of course, it come from a very musical family, in a deeply spiritual family. And it was Ernie who would take take her around. And one last thing, I just have to say this because I'm so tired of reading people making this claim that nobody respected, you know, Alice Coltrane's music. And it's just not true. Every single major musician, like from the beginning, so deeply respected her.
I appreciate you saying
How you
that.
gonna play with Johnny Graf? I mean, everybody respect. No, it was only stupid critics, because critics usually are
So
stupid.
let's make the distinction between her relationship with musicians,
Yes.
which obviously was deep and vast, but then there was actually though a kind of this connoisseur critic class that still kind of holds a grip on what we know as jazz, that made a decision about her.
Yes, and they should all be held to account, and they should pay reparations.
I agree.
Because critics are making more money than musicians.
100%.
And what's sad about this, I'm sorry, but I just have to say this because it just wears me out. If you ever listen to Terry Gibbs' records with Alice, she's the star. I mean, and everybody knows that. It's not like people don't know that. Everybody wanted to play with it. Roy Haynes, I mean, all these amazing musicians, Archie Shepp and others, they just worshipped her. They learned from her. Benny Maupin gives her credit for teaching him when they were young.
And you can see it with her with recordings. The musicians that are constantly circling through the studio with her. These are long, enduring collaborations with her.
Exactly. And
she could play with anybody she wanted to, basically.
Absolutely. And I feel like, all your work is a collaboration with her as well. And so I want to thank you for all that. And thank you, Erin, for this amazing show, and for everyone for coming.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you.
Naya.
Thank you. Thank you. Perfect. Now we will have a presentation by Lauren de Graf. Right after this, we'll be breaking for lunch. Lauren de Graf is a writer, producer, and scholar of film, philosophy, and literature. Lauren has written about film, art, music, and literature for the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Oxford American Magazine, Los Angeles Review of Books, among many others. She recently received a Grammy nomination for her liner notes on Alice Coltrane for the Carnegie Hall concert, and she received a PhD in English and Comparative Literature from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where she was a member of the Royster Society of Fellows. Please join me in welcoming Lauren de Graf.
Hello, Alice Coltrane family, and specifically Michelle. Michelle, where are you? Hi, Michelle. I didn't know you would be here today, so this makes it even better. So thank you, Hammer, for bringing us here together today. Thank you to Erin for the invitation, and thank you to Naya and to Shannon for making this experience so beautiful. To maintain a creative life, we must all find the space to do it. And so today I will be talking about a creative space which belonged to Alice Coltrane Turiya Sangeetananda, specifically the studio that she created in her home at 247 Candlewood Path in Dix Hills, New York, where she lived with her family from around 1964 to 1973, about an hour by train outside of New York City. The title of my talk today, as you see, is Alice Coltrane, the Mother of Home Recording, and by the end of my talk today, I hope to have built a case on why this is a title that she deserves. Alice worked out of her home studio in Dix Hills, sometimes referred to as Coltrane Studios, for about 5 years, from around John's death in 1967 to around 1972, when she moved with her family to California. It was a period, which, as you just heard, in which she was experiencing a profound amount of loss and grief. There was the loss of her husband in 1967. There was a death of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. the following year, which impacted her very deeply. She would go on to dedicate concerts and songs to him. And then, as Robin mentioned, the death of her half-brother, Ernie Farrow, the following year, and she was very close to him. So this was just a very, very profound time of grief. The death of John also brought on a bunch of new responsibilities. She had to think about how she would carry out the work he left behind. She said that he left behind something like 17 unfinished projects that she was now tasked with producing and seeing that they brought to light. And now she also had to establish herself as an artist. When John passed away, she hadn't yet released a solo record. So what sort of artist would she be now? She had been in John's band. She was also in the midst of this very intense spiritual journey, which we'll talk about later today when we watch the documentary by Stan Lathan. There were all these spiritual questions that were really pressing on her during this period of time. How would she engage in a life of spiritual service and make music in service of the Spirit? So these were years that could have killed her. But somehow, in the middle of all of this pain, she found the strength and the focus and the skills she needed to craft these records that are now recognized as classics, including her first solo recording. She became a band leader. She played the harp on record for the first time, and she also experimented with new instrumentation that was typical to Indian devotional music. I believe the Wurlitzer entered her vocabulary at this time as well. So it was just a very profound creative time in terms of her development. And she did this all while she was raising 4 children. So what I want to explore today are those skills and material investments that she made that enabled her to achieve all of this. So this is a photo that I discovered when I was researching the liner notes for the 1971 Carnegie Hall concert. It's from Newsday. It's from 1970. It is, here we see Alice at in the control booth at the mixing board with 3 of her children. There you have Michelle, Ravi, and John. And it was such an inspiring photo for me to discover in the course of my research. First of all, this is 1970. At this point in history, home recording studios were very, very rare. Prior to doing this research, I had written an unrelated article about home recording studios and bedroom producers, and the figure who is often cited, an artistic figure who is often cited as having the first home recording studio is Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. But Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys home recording studio was built in 1968, and it seems like this studio was built in around 67, maybe 66. So it was very striking to me, for historic purposes. Why don't we talk about Alice as the first? And then it was also striking to me because of what she's doing. She's not just in the control booth, but she's at the mixing board, and she's showing her children what she's doing. And maybe they knew that they were being photographed, but I also thought that there was something very genuine and sincere about their attention in this image, and it made me want to learn more. I had also loved Journey in Satchidananda since I was in high school, but I never knew that it was a home recording. I'd heard that Love Supreme had been composed in the Dix Hill home, and that was the fact that I knew about this particular residence. So there was clearly more to this story that piqued my interest. So as I continued to dig, I found even more interesting articles and artifacts that pointed to a need to dig further into her home recording studio. This is an article, as you see, from Newsday from April 1968, and I've highlighted a quote here, which I'll read just because I think it's pretty extraordinary. The lower level of the Coltrane home has been turned into a professionally equipped recording studio with a bank of tape recorders, control booth, an extensive speaker system, and a complex electronic control panel for monitoring, mixing, and editing tapes. It is newly built. Coltrane, who had always wanted to play in such a studio, never got to play in it. He said to me just a few days before he died, Mrs. Coltrane said, that I should go ahead and do this myself. At night, after I put the kids to bed, I come down here and play and write. This is my practice room, too. We're rehearsing here for the concert. I've done all the arrangements, but I've followed patterns my husband set. It's really his music. She went into the control booth and turned on one of the tape machines. I found this to be extraordinary for a number of reasons. There's her husband's dying wish that Alice do it herself. What does that mean? Do it yourself. It could mean, since this is in 1968, we're talking about self-releasing music. This is around the time she founded the Coltrane Recording Corporation and had released Cosmic Music, which was a combination of archival John recordings that she had edited, and she had opened this company to try to continue to release music independently. So that was part of her project at this time. It was a project that ultimately kind of folded because it became too much, and Impulse ended up taking over these projects. So that could be part of what she's talking about here. Also, she's talking about the project of recording and mixing herself, right? So this is not just a place for recording, but mixing, editing, right? Also a place for rehearsal. Also, she's taking the reporter into the control room. What I drew from this is not only is she engineering and recording, and is that technology central to her artistry at this point, but it's also part of her self-presentation. It's part of how she wants us to know about her. That she's taking an active role in her music. Here I have a little excerpt from the liner notes from her album Huntington Ashram Monastery. And this is the end of the liner notes that I've clipped here. And I just found this to be so fascinating because it's a passage in which she's talking about her musical influences. As you can see, I kind of clipped it a little too much there. Bud Powell and Thelonious Monk are my early influences on piano. Talks about the time with Bud Powell in Europe. Learned a great deal from Bud. This recording was cut on a 4-track Ampex AG 440 magnetic recorder. My instruments are the Grand Concert Model 11 Lion and Healy harp and the D Concert Grand Piano by Steinway. So the Ampex AG 440 magnetic recorder, which is pictured right there, fits right between Bud Powell and her harp and her Steinway, which I found to be quite fascinating. Another kind of clue at how central this recording technology is to what she's doing. Here's another profile of her from Newsday in 1970, and that unfolds with her at the mixing board. I'll start from the beginning. I'm on the first track, explained Alice Coltrane as she adjusted the controls of the master switchboard in her recording studio so that only the sounds of her piano could be heard. The 4-track speakers, one for each track of the 4-track recording deck, reacted immediately as she removed echoes from the tape and tuned to the proper pitch so that each instrument could be heard alone first and then together with the other 5 pieces in the sextet. Mrs. Coltrane said her new album would be released at the end of the summer. A student of music since early childhood and a piano player in her late husband's group, Mrs. Coltrane now spends many late hours after her 4 children are in bed, either practicing her piano, reading spiritual books, or editing and mixing tapes her husband recorded but never edited for production. I learned to edit and work the control board by watching the engineers that recorded me, said Mrs. Coltrane. Now I have about 17 privately recorded albums my husband did, in addition to having 2 albums of my own to do, so I have to put the children to bed and come down late at night to practice and work. And she talks about her children getting priority over the work, Mrs. Walcott, the neighbor and governess who watches the children. And then she ends by saying, in the control room of her studio, Mrs. Coltrane worked on several dials to correct static that had developed in one of the 4 speakers above the control panel. I really should start on mixing some of these tapes. I just found this article to be so extraordinary. The quote that she learned to engineer by watching the engineers work, that she's self-taught, she's teaching herself this work of mixing. It's so extraordinary for this time. She's talking about working in the studio after her children to go to bed. It's very clear that the home studio is in this dialectical relationship with her children. When she's not in one place, she's in the other, and they're clearly connected. So next I wanted to show 2 photos of the space. These are well-known photos, if some of you have seen them before, by Akuyoshi Miyashita from 1969. On the left, we have Alice in the control booth. You can tell that because she has the mixing board in front of her, and behind her are the tape decks, I believe they're Ampex tape decks, maybe a mono, a 2-track. I'm not an expert on that part of the studio technology, but those are the tape machines behind her. Also, the color of the carpet, which Erin pointed out to me, is blue, which elsewhere in the literature we know in interior design she used that color blue to symbolize infinity. And then also posters of the Cosmic Music concert that she did, I believe in 1968 at Carnegie Hall on the left. And then on the right we see the space in which the music was recorded. There's her Steinway grand piano and the Lion and Healy harp that John gave her in that photo. We see that this is not a huge space. The ceiling height isn't terribly tall. It's a basement studio. In fact, I corresponded a little bit with her A&R at the time, Ed Michel, who described the studio as a very advanced garage studio. A good home studio, he wrote, but lacking the characteristics of a professional studio. Didn't have sophisticated treatments of wall and ceiling surfaces. The control and mix room weren't acoustically treated. It didn't have a complete arsenal of mics or mix tools. And he also pointed out the small size, which became a limitation because later she would make these records with a lot of strings, these orchestral records, so the small size became a limitation later on. But I'll keep going here with the contact sheets from Chuck Stewart, which are currently up as part of this exhibit. And thank you to Erin for reminding me of these, and they are very, very extraordinary. This is from the 1970 session for Ptah the El Daoud. And through these photos, we can actually see what the studio was like when it was in session, right? So we see Alice, of course. There's Ron Carter at the bass. This session was very special because it had 2 horn players on it, 2 winds. You had Joe Henderson and you had Pharoah Sanders playing. And let's see. Here's some more photos from the session. There we've got Michelle in the upper left corner, wearing a very cute dress. And Michelle in the upper right corner, too, next to her mom, watching. Oh, and on the left, 3rd row down, is Ed Michel, who was her A&R at the time, and he had just taken over from Bob Thiel in 1969, so he looks very fit for the job there. Let's see. Yeah, so I wanted to just take a pause, and I'm doing a lot of talking. Thank you for bearing with me. But I wanted to bring us into the vibe of the recordings and play a little bit from Ptah the El Daoud, the session that you just saw pictured, just so we can get a little bit of flavor for for the music. Oops. Sounds pretty good for a basement. Basement in 1970. A lot of people think that the fact that it was an intimate home recording made it even better. And if you'll remember, a lot of the great recordings from this time were made in Rudy Van Gelder's parents' living room. So there's also a connection there to the history of the tradition that is interesting. But they sure are able to get great sound out of that room. One other thing I'll mention about this recording is that there was a spatial dimension to it, which she talks about in her liner notes. She has Pharoah Sanders coming in on one channel and Joe Henderson coming in on another channel. So there is some, sophistication in the mixing and in the multi-track recording that makes this recording very special. So next I'm going to introduce a name that, unless you really, really love Alice Coltrane, you probably have never heard of. Maybe some of you have heard of him, but you might not forget this name, Roy Musnug. It has quite a ring to it, right? Musnug. And I brought up his Discogs page here to show you all of the projects of Alice Coltrane's that he worked on as her engineer, right? Quite a few. And actually, these are the only credits I could find anywhere online of credits for Roy Musnug. He was a student in his early 20s when he got a cold call from Alice. At the time, he was working for a recording studio on Long Island called the Audio Recording and Manufacturing Company that was near Hempstead, which was about a 30-minute drive west of their home in Dix Hills. Let's listen to an interview with Roy, and apologies in advance for the poor sound quality.
She had called our office at Audio Recording Manufacturing, and she didn't know exactly what we offered. And I said, we have a small studio. I said, can hold about 20 musicians and their equipment. And I said, we do a lot of on-location recording for colleges and so forth. And she says, oh, you don't do construction work? And I said, what do you mean by construction work? Well, she says, I want to build a studio in my lower level of my house. She says, I have 2 young children, and she said, and I have, I don't know if she said nanny or she had an in-law that she called, like, instead of grandma, grandpa, and nanny, and she said, I wanted to see if we could do something with that. So I had a friend who was about 20 years older than I was. He was chief audio and production manager for Decca Records, or MCA, in Manhattan. So I called him, and we set up a date, and we went out to Alice Coltrane's house on Long Island. We walked through and indicated what we could do for her and build a recording studio and a control room. And we would install Ampeg 2-track, 4-track, and 8-track, and a whole control board with mixes and echoes and so forth. I was going to school, and he was working in Manhattan, so some days we went out. If he got off early, we would go out about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, work until about 11 at night. And we got the job done in about 2.5, 3 weeks.
That's it. It's an amazing interview, actually. It's like more than an hour long, but I think one of the most fascinating things about this interview to me is that she more or less oversaw the construction of the project herself, right? John helped her conceive of the idea of the home studio, but he didn't build it. The label didn't come in and build it. This was her project, right? So after this construction finished, she invited him to come back to work with her as an engineer, and he made a proposal to her. He said, "You don't have to pay for travel time," which is interesting because he lived on Long Island, but it's okay. Studio and editing work will be one price, $50 an hour. To put that in today's context, $50 is about $480 an hour. Not too bad, considering that he was doing this twice a week, often after school and after his day job, and sometimes on Saturday and Sunday on his days off. A pretty good entry-level job. He later talks about limiting hours on his other job so that he could be more available to her. The fact that he was there twice a week gives us a sense of how hard she was working at the time and some of the particulars of her working life. She wasn't just going to the basement after the kids went to sleep and kind of, aimlessly, whatever, trying to get some of the motivation to work. She was there meeting an engineer, which no doubt made her time more efficient. Working with Roy so regularly also meant she didn't have to deal with a lot of inconveniences. She didn't have to drive the long distance to Rudy Van Gelder's studio in New Jersey. She didn't have to worry about booking out studio time well in advance. He was there very regularly, and since he lived nearby on Long Island, he could basically be there on call. And I also think it gives some insight into her process as well, right? There's something about that question about construction. You don't do construction? That I find really interesting. It suggests a certain style of approach, right? When she's approaching a technical challenge. What she didn't know about constructing a studio didn't stop her, right? And also doesn't seem to be after perfection or the most prestigious name in recording, from what I can gather. She wants someone who's available, who she can work with and get the job done with. And again, she brings up the caretaker in context with the studio. It's like she doesn't bring up the studio without bringing up the children, which is just very fascinating. And it just, again, suggests how central the kids were to her imagination of this studio. I wanted to return again to these amazing Chuck Stewart contact sheets and revisit the presence of children in them. Again, the photo of Michelle on the left and of Michelle with her mother, and then Ravi looking very smart in his button-up and trousers, very interested, apparently, in what Ron Carter is doing on the bass. That's John Jr. I'm so sorry. John Jr. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. No, I'm glad you did. I'm really glad you did because, yeah, I almost slipped that one through. Thank you. So, although in some photos, the photos that I showed you before, the studio looks like it could be a commercial space, the contact sheets remind us that the studio was a home office and not a hermetically sealed chamber that kept children away. Whatever sound insulation the engineers were able to install, it was not enough to prevent the sounds and vibrations from permeating the house. In multiple interviews, Michelle has spoken about this. She says one of the strongest memories of the home in Dix Hills is the sound coming through the floorboards, especially of the screeching sound of the analog tape machines, which I think you said it was something like that you could hear through the floors, of her mom downstairs working on the tapes. And also, the instruments in the musical life wasn't off limits to them. There was no preciousness about the musical instruments. They had a family music night. Again, Michelle can speak to this in more detail. But the children were part of this aspect of her life, of her recording life, and of her musical life. So next I'll play an interview with Rowry Coltrane that was conducted by Ashley Kahn. In this interview, Rowry shares his memories of music in the house and also of one unforgettable interaction with his mother that occurred while she was making music. And by the way, this interview is printed in the gorgeous catalog that accompanies this exhibit, which I recommend that you all check out.
I guess the most primary memories are the music, the music that was coming out of the basement, That was where my mom was not only recording, but that's where she was playing every day, practicing and playing for her own musical and spiritual and enjoyment. I do remember one time, how kids can be a little rambunctious or something, I remember one occasion trying to get my mother's attention. She was at the organ and almost sort of, with her eyes closed, and very much how she would always approach the music, getting very, very connected with it, very deep with it. And I was either pulling at her, trying to get her attention. She was very deep in the music, and I was, Mom. And I reached up and hit the switch for the organ, turned it off. Like while she was in mid musical expression, and she was not happy about that. And I was immediately sent to my room, and whatever it was that I was trying to get from her at that moment, I did not get.
If you want more of that interview, check out the catalog. It's a wonderful interview and a wonderful book. So I'm going to switch gears as I wind this long talk to a close. Here's an image of another artist's work. This is Virginia Woolf's book-length essay from 1929 called A Room of One's Own. What is she doing bringing up Virginia Woolf now? Well, often when we talk about women artists and their creative spaces, it's a convenient reference. And for a split second, I thought, maybe I should call this a studio of one's own, before I realized it was not the formulation at all that I was looking for. But I will leave it here as a reference because I think it gives us something to define Alice's studio against, right? It helps us understand what it was and what it was not. In A Room of One's Own, Woolf famously writes, "A woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction." She writes of solitude as the ideal condition for the development of women's writing and of the many obstacles women writers encounter as they try to achieve intellectual work done in a patriarchal world, including limited access to libraries and public spaces. She describes how women writers often had to do their work in sitting rooms where they were aware of the presence of others, and they had to keep their writing a secret, which, as she argues, impeded the development of women's fiction, as the pressure and presence of other people's ideas could always be detected in the writing. And she asks us to consider what the work of novelists like Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte would have been had they been able to have some privacy in which to write. So, wonderful, important text. Alice's studio was not a room of her own. As I've shown. It was a room where she worked by herself sometimes, yes, but it was also a room where she met an engineer twice a week, at least. It was a room where she rehearsed with others and recorded with others. It was a room where she met reporters and invited photographers. And while it wasn't a kid's playroom, her kids clearly had some access to her there, and she had access to the children. It was a studio that was more or less constructed with the constant, unyielding mother-child dialectic in mind, a space that was both apart from them from them and accessible to them. She built that studio both so she could be a mother and an artist. As Rowry also said later in that interview, the space in her house where she was really off limits was her bedroom. That was where she did her meditation. Also, she writes in the liner notes for her album, Huntington Ashram Monastery, the place where she went for refuge was inside of herself. She writes, "Of the many humanly constructed ashrams and monasteries throughout the world, I feel that the real ashram is in your heart." So while the studio was a room that enabled her to attend to the very womanly concern of her work as a mother, I don't feel that it was a space that necessarily bristled against the patriarchy in the way that Woolf's construction invites us to. It was a project that was conceived with her husband, a project that was used to carry out shared dreams, his projects as well as hers. And well after his death, she would refer to John as the father, revering him as a musical and spiritual guide. This wasn't a space where she was attempting to displace his influence or presence, but often to bring it in, to invoke it. She described the work of playing his music after his passing as a means to commune with his spirit. But what is clear is that, like Woolf, Alice Coltrane knew the power of money and of space, the material realities necessary to advance her creative work as a mother of four. So why is her home studio important? Why does it matter to us? I'll leave us with a few ideas, and hopefully after I finish, we'll get a chance to talk about this. I believe it's important for music history that she be considered as a central, pioneering figure in the evolution of people making music at home. She's a very important part of this history, and she had some very interesting reasons for not wanting to go to a big studio and for needing to make music on her own terms. And we have, Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys studio, they have their own Wikipedia page. I think it's time for Alice to have hers. Right? And I don't want to just put pictures up here. We have Prince, Paisley Park. Everybody knows Paisley Park. I wrote an article about this guy, so he's kind of friend of mine sometimes, Chaz Bundick of Troy Moi. And who's often heralded as kind of this pioneering indie bedroom producer with the advent of DAWs, of digital audio workstations, and of course, Billie Eilish in the home studio with Phineas. I think we all know that Sly Stone. I hope we all know that Sly Stone in the upper right corner, and there's the Beach Boys studio in the upper left. So yes, she is a very important and overlooked part of this music history. Also, we need to know more about this history because it's important to our understanding of Alice. There's definitely this beautiful spiritual mystique that enfolds her, and those of us who have studied her are well aware there was so much more to her. She was someone who bought land, created intentional living communities, started her own record label. She was aware of the immense privilege and freedom that she had because of John's money, and she had a keen understanding of the material conditions necessary for motherhood, for creative work, and for the spirit. She also really wanted to keep control of her music. When she was signed to Impulse, this is what her A&R Ed Michelle said, the label bosses were not as interested in her as they were interested in John. Alice had come to the label through John, and she was very important to them, especially as far as she controlled his masters. Nevertheless, they were not putting all of the weight behind her projects that as much as they could have, and hence the publication of, or the release of the Carnegie Hall concert, which was supposed to have been, she wanted to release that in the early 1970s, and it just came out last year. So she had to be very, very enterprising, and had she not been so enterprising in charting her own path to recording, it is not a stretch to say that these records would not have existed. And finally, I will say that the good folks at the John and Alice Coltrane home are in the midst of a fundraising project to restore this studio. So if you or someone you know would like to donate to that cause, you can find out more on their website. Thank you.
I'm thrilled to announce Timothy Anne Burnside and Jason King, who will be in conversation about the Black Journal documentary focusing on Alice Coltrane. This documentary was made for a segment of National Education Television's program Black Journal and directed by Stan Lathan. This was born out of the Newark unrest in 1967 and aimed to proliferate positive representations of Black life, and it lives with the Smithsonian in their Pearl Bowser collection. The segment, shot primarily at the Coltrane home in Dix Hills, focuses on the life of Alice Coltrane and her children in the wake of the death of John Coltrane in 1967. Coltrane discusses the influence of her late husband on her life, both musically and spiritually, and she discusses her musical career and how she balances that with being a mother and paying tribute to John while not wanting to be defined as an extension of him. She says that when she finds herself playing some of the music he wrote, she sees herself as sharing in what he produced during his career. Throughout the documentary, Coltrane emphasizes her relationship with the higher power and the personal enlightenment she has felt and gained through meditation. So I'm going to introduce Timothy Anne Burnside. She is an accomplished museum professional with over 20 years of experience at the Smithsonian Institution. Her work examines the intersections of history and culture through the lens of music and performing arts via the acquisition, research, and interpretation of material culture. As a curator at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, she builds collections that embrace a variety of diverse and unique objects and develops exhibitions, programs, publications, and digital media that provide innovative and nuanced representations of history and cultural expression. She served as project assistant and co-producer for Jazz Appreciation Month, JAM, for 2 years. In 2006, she helped launch the Smithsonian's first hip-hop initiative and began building a collection. Timothy transitioned to the National Museum of African American History and Culture in 2009 and joined the curatorial team responsible for developing the museum's collection and exhibitions. Timothy contributed to several NMAAHC inaugural exhibitions, including Musical Crossroads, Sports Leveling the Playing Field, Taking the Stage, Cultural Expressions, and Power of Place. She has produced and contributed to diverse award-winning projects, such as the NMAAHC's Grand Opening Festival, Freedom Sounds, a community celebration, the groundbreaking publication of the Smithsonian Anthology of Hip Hop and Rap, and the podcast All Music is Black. Recent projects in the NMAAHC include the Hip Hop Block Party, the exhibition Afrofuturism, A History of Black Futures, which received the Smithsonian Award for Excellence in Exhibitions in 2024, and the publication Musical Crossroads, Stories Behind the Objects of African American Music, which received the Secretary's Research Prize in 2025. Jason King is the Dean of the USC Thornton School of Music. He's a Canadian-American scholar, journalist, author, musician, performer, producer, songwriter, radio, and video host. Does it all. Before his appointment at USC, King was chair of the Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music at Tisch School of the Arts at NYU, where he also served as a James Weldon Johnson Associate Professor. He was the Institute's founding full-time faculty member, working alongside Clive Davis to help develop the program. With early personal roots in classical piano and musical theater training, King's musical interests and accomplishments are broad, spanning pop, R&B, gospel, jazz, rock, and other styles. As a scholar and public intellectual with a PhD from NYU, his multidisciplinary work includes African American and African diasporic cultural studies, performance studies, globalization, transnationalism studies, media and technology studies, music business, marketing and branding studies, and gender and queer studies. In his capacity as a professor at NYU, King taught classes for more than 2 decades on popular music history and geography, identity and cultural politics, art development and music marketing, and the social aspects of music technology. King also taught postgraduate studies in producing transnational media ventures for the MFA program in international media producing at Tisch School of the Arts, Asia and Singapore. King is currently delving into directing and producing his own documentaries, and he is at work on a revisionist biography of Freddie Mercury. He is also an inaugural member of the Hip Hop Council at the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C., the Black Genius Brain Trust, and he serves on the advisory board of the Journal of Popular Music Studies. So now we'll be watching the Black Journal episode.
Hello, everyone. How are we doing? How was lunch? Great. We're feeling energized. Hi, Jason.
Hi, Timothy.
How are you?
It's always good to see you.
So good to see you too. The last time we saw each other, I was doing a different interview for his program. And here we are together.
That's true. Yeah.
This is so great. I want to say thank you to Erin, of course, our wonderful hostess, and the brilliant mind behind the exhibition, along with Naya, of course, and Shannon, and I mean, just everybody here at the Hammer has been absolutely incredible to work with, and truly honored to be here, and very excited to have a conversation with Jason, not just because you are, like me, a major nerd, in all things music and history, but also I'm, without giving too much away, the fact that you are embarking on a new chapter as a director of documentary projects about musicians. And so I thought how wonderful to be in conversation with you about this beautiful film. No pressure, Stan Lathan, like it's cool, right? Like
Me or Stan Lathan. Yeah, just,
You're
either
good.
way, whatever. Yeah. But I'm always glad to see you, and welcome to LA.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad to be back. I will say, too, that this is such a nice change of energy from D.C., and I'll leave it at that.
What's going on in DC?
I mean, not much.
Nothing.
We're hanging out.
That's
I'm just hanging out.
normal stuff.
I'm just out there.
Yeah, okay.
So I wanted to, before we get into the actual film, just quickly kind of set the stage for where this even comes from and what this Black Journal series, where it's born out of. So with everything happening in the country, specifically in Newark in 1967, the idea to do a documentary about what was happening led to the desire essentially to not just show the strife, but the positivity of Black life in America on television screens. And so at that time, I mean, you can talk a little bit about it, what's going on culturally too between 67 and 70 when this was shot. The selection of people for the Black Journal series, which aired on National Educational Television, precursor to all things in between that and PBS, the roster of folks in the Black Journal series with these just quick little, snapshots, but incredibly intimate snapshots. So that's where this comes from. And maybe, Jason, if you wanted to just, kind of paint the picture of what this means at this time to have someone like Alice Coltrane even just selected for this project at all, because she's not Angela Davis, who is also part of this, but she's clearly important, but...
Yeah. Well, I think you set it up well. I mean, Black Journal was so important because what they were trying to do, as you basically just alluded to, was to represent the reality of Black life. And so you have to remember this is set against the context of the misrepresentation of Black people, particularly in the 60s, and obviously it would get worse in the early 70s, just a couple of years later when you talk about the rise of blaxploitation cinema and everything else. But the idea was to try to represent the truth and whatever that means, right, at a certain moment. And of course, this is happening around the same time as the rise of Black arts movement. There's so much that's happening, of course, politically in Black culture. And so what that looks like is just these frank 16 millimeter depictions of Black people, whether they're celebrities or not, in all of their glory, doing the things that they do, or just in even in the example that we just looked at, there's an element of like mundanity, just at home. And those elements and those aspects of Black life are often not covered. Even today, it's rare to see that. And so what an amazing opportunity to see Alice Coltrane at home with her children in this moment. And a lot of people would not have known her at this point, certainly. They would have known John Coltrane, which is probably the reason that it begins with
right.
John
You
Coltrane's
would think
face.
it's a film about John Coltrane for the first minute or two, because it is about him to set the stage.
And it's an odd directorial choice. I know Stan's not here,
yeah.
but it's like, here's John Coltrane in a
Yes.
male narrator voice talking about Alice, So, but I understand that's the entry point. That's where we need to start, and that completely makes sense. In 1970, in Black Journal, though, they also had another, they had many episodes that year, but there was another episode on the Black woman, literally the Black woman. So this was a year in which, there was or let's just say through that program, they were attempting also to demonstrate the reality of Black life by talking about gender specifically and by highlighting aspects of gender. And so I do think there's something interesting about what we're seeing on screen, which is just Alice Coltrane at home talking about her choice between career and between family. You know, Paul Gilroy, the great scholar, once talked about the idea of the Black pastoral and pastoralism. And so this is an early depiction of that, and I'm thinking this is around the same time as like the learning tree and, you know, some of the stuff that Gordon Parks is going to do later. But, you know, all these images of the pink flowers and all the green grass and the home environment. Again, I think it's just an unusual look at Black life and the kind of thing that I'd love to see more of. It also reminded me of Spike Lee's Crooklyn, if anybody remembers that, which also has this whole moment of like leaving the urbanity and going into the pastoral at a certain moment. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I think of, with the introduction, how Alice, you know, or Betty Davis, or, you know, pick the wife of a very famous Black male creative who has their own career, their own creative existence, is often the secondary point. And but that is the entry point for this audience, for Alice at the time. So very glad that it quickly shifted to her. Even the subtlety of having the photograph of her in the background of John as she's mentioned, and so introducing her in that way. So I think that the beauty of this film, number one, the aesthetics of it, the visuals of it, the choices made by Stan, even small things that stuck out to me, like letting the camera linger on the vibrating harp strings and giving us that moment to sit with the actual vibrations that, of course, connect so deeply to her spirituality as she gets very, very deep into later on. And I think those kinds of choices are really interesting to me for how he's framing her, as you said, doing what she probably does every day, but turning it into this very intimate moment that represents so much more.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Alice Coltrane is just a badass.
Sure.
Period.
100%.
Prior to even
100%.
meeting John Coltrane,
Yes.
just a badass. But I love the scene of her driving up in the Jag.
I thought
just
the son was driving at first. When I first saw it, I was like, "How is he?" Oh no, it's Alice is in there too. Okay.
Driving up in the Jag into the house. It's a great image. But, you know, I think there's an interesting contrast that's happening in the film. One between the interiors, which take up a lot of the film, and then the exteriors, the outside. So the Black inside, the Black outside. And then, you know, the use of close-ups, right, to produce this feeling of intimacy. And so even during the concert, there's moments where you probably should be looking at the hands or maybe some mid-shots, and there's some of those, but it's a lot of faces. It's a lot of really, really intimate close-up shots, even at the house. And so when she's playing the harp, I mean, as you mentioned, the strings, the fingernails, I'm seeing Alice's fingernails, I'm seeing her hands with also scar marks. And so all of this is sort of intertextual. If you know about her life or know about the things that she went through in this 3-year period, you know, right after her husband died, I mean, she went through a lot. She was extremely ill. She was meditating, of course, and she describes it as being something that's, you know, pushing the boundaries of human tolerance for meditation. But this was a deep, deep inner journey that was, I'm sure, very painful for family members and for those to watch. And, you know, she injured herself, she burned herself, she lost weight, she was 95 pounds, and she says she came very, very close to death.
Which was the sacrifice to get to the other side.
Yeah. As she saw it.
Yeah.
I'm sure it might have read differently.
Yes, to the outside world, perhaps it translated differently. Yeah. But the way that she was processing it from a spiritual level, that was necessary for her to reach this. I think that it's interesting to hear her talk about, even with the harp and her connection with the past, present, and her peace with the future, this very essentially Afrofuturistic perspective that she has, where she's existing simultaneously in those places. And that's what got her there.
So, you know, Toni Morrison has this thing in Hope where she talks about grief, right? And Toni Morrison had obviously lost her own kid, and she talks about the idea of rejecting closure, and she says, why, I don't need closure. She considers it like a Western concept. She's like, I want my thing. I want to go through it. I want whatever that is. And, Alice Coltrane went through it. She went through it, and she synthesizes that grief, and she synthesizes all of the aspects of her life, including the temporality aspect. The past, the present, the future are all one, which is this kind of non-dualistic approach to life, to experience. And all of that shows up in the music as well, right? And so you think of the records that probably preceded this, like a monastic trio, because this is done in 70?
Yeah, 70.
But like fall 70 probably? I mean, it's not really clear exactly when.
Well, based on the flowers, I would say maybe spring to summer.
Spring, summer. Spring, that's a good. So it's before, but this is before, well, let me see. It's interesting just to think about when this is in
On the
terms of her
timeline of
album
the albums.
cycle. But probably Patah El Duwad, it's like before that, and then that would have come out, and then she would have done Journey, and then of course later Universal Consciousness. So it's actually in this moment in which she's been producing this work, but she's finding a way to channel some of that grief and her the fact that she's come to terms with the grief, right, and that she can talk about it so succinctly, and that gets channeled through the music, but not in the way that you would think. It's not like, the music is going to be the exorcism for all of this. It's all there for you if you know how to read it, and everything is there. You just have to kind of, as Miri Baraka would say, dig it, to get there. It's incredible.
Yeah, it is, and I appreciate how straightforward she is in this piece. She's like, I'm good with money. I'm good there, right? John set me up well. I don't have to leave the house if I don't want to. And in Lauren's presentation earlier, she talked about the home studio and how Alice would go down there in the evenings and do all the work she wanted and needed to do. But it's more of the want at that point. Or even as she talked about live performance, she's like, it's a lot of work for me to do this. And so I'll do it when I want to, when I'm called to. But to have that kind of, as you were saying, you get this very public, and also the children connection with the concert and the home, and how that's also centered, even on stage behind her playing tambourine. They're clearly, truly centered in her life. But to have that multiple perspective that is just as intimate as you were saying before, because the concert footage is pretty remarkable.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the seriousness. I mean, when they talk about jazz as a serious music, I mean, it's really serious. It's heavy, right? And you get the heaviness. And again, I think part of that is filmic. I think it's part of the way that it's filmed. So Stan is just great at conveying the nature of the playing and the feeling and the intensity. And as Ornette Coleman say, the temperature that the music is cooking at. You get all of that, and you feel it really viscerally. And her contribution to all of that. But can I also just say her fashion?
We were gonna go there for
happening?
sure. For
Like,
sure.
what?
I so appreciate the time capsule that this film is, because she is right there with all of the looks, and so are the guys on stage too, to be clear. They are, and I think that also element of the collective of all those musicians with her. But yes, no, she's
the braid across the forehead.
The orange shoes when she's at the
shoes.
piano, even like the subtle ways that she's always bringing that in. Like I was taking notes.
But it's not, to me, it's not just, it's also a piece of the time, right? So if you looked at, what Roberta Flack is wearing, or Nina Simone, et cetera, this is a moment of that kind of, regality in fashion that's, of course, Afrocentric as well. But the sense I get from the fashion choices that she makes, which are distinctly hers, is that she's so centered. She's just full of self in a way that's not egocentric at all, because it's obviously, her as a deeply spiritual being, but it's somebody who's very, very confident in themselves in the exact moment in which they are. And that shows up externally through the fashion choices, which all seem to just make sense and look great.
And I think that the idea of not in the film, but you mentioned like the lack of ego, so even the fact that, I'm sure this is a known story, right, that when Stevie calls her to play the harp, she says, she hears it and she's like, this isn't really my vibe, man. Like, sorry, Stevie, but call Dorothy. And so he
Dorothy
did.
Ashby.
And he called Dorothy Ashby, and the rest is history. We have, a legendary moment. But she knew in that moment that, like, yeah, I could do this, but it's not really, I'm not here for this moment.
Yeah.
That's not for me. So let me pass it on to another legendary Black female harpist. How many can you name? But they had this wonderful, again, the idea of a collective, the idea of a community, and for her being able to recognize when it was time, when it was okay for her to step aside, even though it's Stevie Wonder, hello, but still, she gave Dorothy that spotlight, which I think is really remarkable.
Also, I got to say, the playing of the harp, it's great. I mean, we talked about it before, but it's great to see it even in this context and to literally watch her fingering. I was mentioning, the scars in her hand and so on, which I think, refer to where she had been just prior to the filming of all of this. But the playing of the harp, when we talk about Dorothy Ashby, who's genius, brilliant, but Alice's playing is like no other. And it's interesting also that this is, 70? So she's probably been playing it like 5 years at this point.
Yeah, she mentioned
It's
in
not
the beginning that
long,
the harp is kind of her newer instrument.
which is insane. But also, it's the glissandos, the constant glissandos up and down. And she describes it, I think, as like flowingness or something like that, which is an interesting word, kind of neologism. But the constant sense of flow and the way that she plays, the virtuosity that's there, it's fascinating, I think, to watch. And she also, later, like when playing the piano, you see a great amount of exertion, but with the harp, it's far more meditative, right? It just feels that she creates this, like, it's like water. It's like literally the motion of water.
It's a different connection for her with the actual instrument. I am fascinated with the harp because I don't understand how people play it. I play lots of other instruments, but that is, so to your point, I find it mesmerizing. Like I could just watch her play just forever. And so that she's inserting that idea, those feelings into her music that is, transcending these ideas of what jazz should be at the time. I think the idea of Alice's place in the legacy of music, the legacy of jazz, it was mentioned earlier that let's not forget she could play with anybody. She could call anyone and, have a session, whether it was recorded or not, but yet she's not getting the respect out in the streets. And she's well revered within the circles of people, but even, I know for a fact a lot of people are finding out about Alice because of this exhibition.
Oh, sure.
100% that's the reality. And so her private life was her private life, but it was so unique in a professional way. She had access to people that folks could only dream of, but to your point, again, about ego, didn't exist, didn't have it, wasn't important. And you can feel that in the way that she creates and the way that she records at home, which we heard about earlier, and just the like you said, the oneness. And I think that when she is closing this, and I know we have to close soon, her final statements are just so powerful about the relationship she found with the idea of God or God. And you just see the peace on her face. You can feel it. And she says twice, I'm free.
Yeah. Well, I think more than peace to me is liberation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like that's a vision of somebody who's at their most liberated. And it's fascinating, again, because the music she's about to make, we know what that is. And we know what liberated music looks like and sounds like to her, which is also, about the kind of global interdependence of, South Asian music and culture and Black music culture and all that resonates with and so on. But we're seeing a vision of somebody who's deeply, deeply liberated, but went through an enormous amount of trauma to get there, which we didn't see, but we can feel, and we can feel it by way of the liberation that she presents. But it really is a treatise on freedom. And again, it makes me think of Toni Morrison, and it makes me think of Beloved in so many ways, and the idea of grief and what it does to us, especially to Black people, Black women. But in this context, the way that she she doesn't take control of it. She is at peace with
Chooses
it.
to embrace
She
it
chooses to
in
embrace
order
it.
to, yes.
The suffering
Yeah.
and all
Yeah.
of that. So
It's beautiful.
it really is. I do, since you mentioned closing, I want to just mention the gate, the
Oh,
white
I know.
gate.
Isn't that fabulous?
It's interesting because it opens with the gate
Yeah, and then-
the children opening the gate to us, which is letting us into this personal world. And, you know, the Coltrane family and how many people get to see that and experience that. I don't know the family. I don't know if Michelle is here now. I do know Ravi. I've done a few things with him. So it's fascinating to see him as a little kid, little baby Ravi. But at the end, the kind of dolly shot where you see the gate closing and the kids are there waving to you.
You pass by the gate as it's, yeah.
There's something just really fascinating about that to me, and I don't know. I think it has to do with that idea of the pastoral, the way in which you see other images in the film of her and the kids walking around in the grass and the flowers and so on. That's how I often think of Alice Coltrane, anyway.
Yeah.
So it's great that those are some of the images that he picked, but there's something incredibly beautiful and moving about that, and I think it's just seeing a Black woman who is an artistic and creative genius, who is also a mother, who has figured out, how to manage aspects of her career with being a mother. She didn't get there in an easy way. I'm sure she's still struggling with it, even in this moment that we're seeing. But there's something deeply powerful, even though it's just 17 minutes of watching somebody who's a master, not only in the artistic and creative realm, but also in her personal life and realm, and how she's, dealt with the trauma that she's just gone through.
Absolutely, and I think that the results met the goal with this project. I think that this representation of Alice, to me, is the example of what they were trying to do with this whole series, in a way, is just give people glimpses into different versions of life for Black people, and in this case for Black women, that you would never see otherwise on a screen, big or small, at this time. And I think that's incredibly beautiful. You can see this online, by the way. As mentioned, it is part of the Smithsonian's collection, this film in particular. It's also in the Criterion collection, which is pretty incredible. But you can also find more of these episodes of the Black Journal. It ended up running till 2008 under different iterations and names and things. But this is my favorite episode of it.
Well, there's nothing so unguarded anymore. We don't live in that time, right, where you would even film something like this. So it feels like an incredible, blast from the past that's worthy of taking another look at.
So thank you to Stan Lathan for directing it.
Incredible.
And thank you to Jason for being here
Thank you,
to talk
Timothy,
about it.
for having me here.
Of course. And Erin and everybody. And with that, we will move on to the next segment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Timothy and Jason. All righty. Now I'm going to introduce Harmony Holiday. Harmony Holiday is a writer and interdisciplinary artist working across dance, film, music, and archives of Black culture. She is the author of 5 collections of poetry, including Hollywood Forever and Mafa. She curates a standing archive space for griot poetics and a related performance and event series at LA's music and archive venue 2220 Arts. She's a staff writer for LA Times Image and 4 columns, and has work in the New Yorker, Book Forum, Paris Review, and The Drift, among others. Her first solo exhibition, Black Backstage, explored the aspects of Black performance, culture, which opened at the Kitchen in New York, spring 2024. She's won a 2025 Creative Capital Award, as well as fellowships from Poetry Foundation, Silvers Foundation, the Rabkin Foundation, Schoenberg Center for Research in Black Culture, among other awards for her writing. She's currently working on a biography of Abby Lincoln for Yale University Press, and a book of a memoir and music criticism, and her next collection of poems, among other writing, film, and curatorial projects. Please join me in welcoming Harmony Holiday.
Welcome. Hi. Thanks for being here. Let me get myself situated. So, we're jumping. Actually, I'm going to stand. We're jumping from the 70s to the 90s, and we're going to listen to one of her songs, or sections of it, from 1996. And I think it's a significant jump because she talks a lot in this about self-realization, and you can see how she has, across this span, self-actualized in a new way. So you see her in the Detroit Black Journal, and there's still a tinge of fragility, and here there's just this strength that's almost jarring and really beautiful. So I'll read a little bit, and then I will play. Make sure the sound is queued up correctly. I might need Shannon to show me where the sound is. Sorry, it's not. Oh, there we go. Okay. The inflections Alice Coltrane accesses and sustains across dimensions on her Lion and Healy concert harp, warm and reverent, but never timid or resigned in ecstatic blues that transcends genre, are nothing like her oratory during divine satsangs in her ashram. And satsang translates from the Sanskrit to like a gathering in the company of truth, I guess, literally. Her spoken register is messianic devotion, exasperated with non-adherence, fools, and chaos demons. She scolds, ruminates, scolds some more, laughs at and taunts human beings with God complexes who flaunt and fawn over their errors. She jinxes their hubris. After her playing just washed their souls. Her duality settles into what feels like speechlessness and texture. The two tones are so divergent they feel like rivals who will only be satisfied when both are quiet, quelled by obedience, relieved of the duties, and attached to the austerities or tapas delivered from karma. But this voice, until that time, is karma itself, looming and illumined, warning you of its impending pounce on your misguided will, wounding your pride with precision, scaling it like a prison wall to reach inside you and alter the ratio between humility and bragging. All this so she can tell you, you are not enlightened. You will not find God on this path of folly, vanity, and lust. Listening to several of these recordings, like a re-education by fire, put me in the mind of Kendrick Lamar's Mortal Man from his 2015 To Pimp a Butterfly album, on which he goes from solitary rants and soliloquies to startlingly intimate conversation with Tupac across epics, using samples in the great Black gospel tradition of call and response. It's better than elegy, it's effigy, light-hearted resurrection before laying the hero to rest again. He visits and offers reassurance. Turia's satsangs are like this for me, unexpected and liberating. I feel like she's talking to me alone, to you alone, and also to herself as she addresses the devotees in her modest congregation. The zealotry in her cadence is jarring at first, the way Pox is, because it's so resolute and acrid and never tempered by sweet nothings until the very end, where she whispers them in your ear as prayers and promises. I changed everything. I realized my destiny in a matter of 5 years, Tupac brags to Kendrick. The Lord brings our karma to you to help them on their path to self-realization, Turia sings back. Tupac was assassinated in 1996, the year this recording. Isn't it refreshing to call it what it is, not just a regular homicide, but an assassination? He was martyred a couple of weeks before her birthday that year. Though I don't know the exact date she delivered this particular satsang, just the year, I imagine it here as eulogy for self-aggrandizement, for the self-aggrandizement in Black music, whose principles the death of 2 rappers under 30 would happen between 1996 and 1997 substantiate. So I'm going to attempt my version of Mortal Man with this.
1996 year gives us opportunities to reach goals, to accomplish objectives, to edify, to go closer to God, closer to completion of the spiritual path. That's the purpose of life, is to go all the way from here to liberation, self-realization, realization in God. One would hope that in any one lifetime you could achieve it. If it can't be possible, the Lord is giving you that opportunity, life after life, to strive, to become liberated, to strive, to become self-realized, to strive to become God-realized. God gives you the new birth to continue on in your evolutionary path to realization of God. The Lord always has a major plan for the people of this world. Otherwise, it would have been finished long ago. The Lord could have selected a few and said, this is enough. These ones have already realized me. Therefore, I don't have to consider any other purpose for creation. But God is not like that. The Lord doesn't think like the people think.
And how can you surpass this culture without imitating all the violence it glorifies? How can I self-actualize?
The 1996 year gives us opportunities to reach goals, to accomplish the objective. Lifetime you could achieve it. If it can't be possible, the Lord is giving you that opportunity, life after life, to strive, to become liberated, to strive, to become self-realized, to strive to become God-realized. God gives you the new birth to continue on in your evolutionary path to realization of God. The Lord always has a major plan for the people of this world. Otherwise, it would have been finished long ago. The Lord could have selected a few and said, this is enough. These ones have already realized me. Therefore, I don't have to consider any other purpose for creation. But God is not like that. The Lord doesn't think like the people think.
I'm just going to let it play. I tried to set it up like the Kendrick track.
I don't have to bring
There we go.
any condemnation upon any persons because they're out there condemning themselves. I do not have to bring harm to any persons. They're harming themselves. Look at that. You're seeing the laws of cause and effect in action. The Lord doesn't have to lift a finger. However, those who choose to live the spiritual life in obedience to God's will can avoid so much unnecessary problems, unnecessary sufferings. Not that you'll be so completely free from suffering when you're on the spiritual path. The Lord may bring some voluntary suffering to you, particularly those who are servitors, those who would one day serve the Lord. You have to bear with the sufferings of others. The Lord brings their karma to you to suffer for their sake, to help them on their evolutionary path to realization. So it goes with the territory here. But we again have so much to be thankful for in the mercy of Sri Satya Sai Baba Bhagwan, the Lord, who's given us new opportunities, daily opportunities to strive, to edify, to be more determined, to be more resolved on the spiritual path, to complete the spiritual path. That's what's said. Those who are in the highest path, the highest category, the Uttam Marg, they're going to go all the way, despite any conflict, any impediments, any obstacles, any tests or trials. They're going the full distance, all the way to God. So Om Shanti. Let's look at how the Lord was teaching 5,000 years ago, 8 billion years ago, and then even before even the creation of many of our known forms of life were even here. The Lord was giving the science of self-realization. Even the first created being had to hear the science of self-realization before he could create.
And what is the light of the worlds now outside the chaos and Maya?
But
Where
he said,
should I look?
Prakashaya, that's the light. That's something that illumines. That's something that's shining. That's something that's resplendent and radiant. He said, Naham Prakashaya. The Lord said, I don't show myself. I don't manifest myself. Let's go down the line. What I let the people see, because when you see me, you're going to see real light. You will have the illumination. You won't get the Yoga Maya. Yoga Maya, Samavrita. He said, what you see, particularly those, we didn't finish this verse yet. What does really the majority of the people see when they think of God, or if they think they see God, or if they have a vision? He said, I'm covered by my Yoga Maya. The Lord, you know, is the master of yoga. Then he finishes by saying, Mudo. Mudayam navijanati. The foolish people will never know me. They never see my light. They'll never be illumined by me. They'll never realize me. Because I'm covered up in the Maya. He said, the foolish ones. He defined it, didn't he? They don't know me. Nabi Janati. Nabi, na. Jana. You know? Nabi Janati, they don't know me. They can't know me. Mudas can't know me. They don't know I am unborn. I am undying, supreme, avyayam, inexhaustible.
Why are fools dangerous? Why is their power counterfeit? Why is the corruption so anchored here and so influential? What is their malice? How do I live with malice for none, with no worthy enemies
That they're
among them?
worse than foolish. They're more than foolish when they believe that they're so great and that they know everything. How do you do it? Through self-appointed sannyas? How do you do it? Self-styled position? Let God nominate you. Let God elevate you. Let God give you position. Let God promote you. Is that clear to you what Baba's words are? He's saying you only need love in your heart for God. You don't have kama, krodha, lobha, moha, mud, and matsya. You know what those are? Baba's telling us that kama, desire, should not reside in your heart. Krodha, anger, should not be there. That krodha. Lobha, greed, should not be there. Moha, which is delusion, does not belong there. Mud is obsession for power. Matsya is malice. These should not reside in your heart. Only love for God. Don't be anxious for authority, anxious for power. Don't take advantage. Don't have hostilities. Don't have desires. That's the first one, was desire. Because Baba tells us if that's in there, then there's no love for God. And it's not even room for God to be in there. There's no room for the love of God to be in there. It's overcrowded with those 6 enemies. They call them Shadari. There's no room for the Lord. Or God's will, or God's word, or God's way, with the crowd of enemies residing in your heart. All you need is God. Give you guidance. You want to know the Lord? Surrender. All of that ego, who needs it? Any anger, hostility, surrender all of that.
You said eagle when you meant to say ego. Thank you. Please explain the cross, the crossroads. It's everyone replicating souls. I've witnessed this. The
But
cross
the Lord
is
is
an
going to
instrument
bring
of
things
torture.
to you if you think, oh, I'm ready to serve. You have your own preconceived notions about what the spiritual path is and what you should be doing. Get rid of those, because you'll see it'll be totally different. You may have to go down with your cross. Don't ask the Lord to take it away. Don't ask God to remove it. Ask, give me the strength to get up with this cross and keep going. Yes. Learn to do it. It's all the Lord anyway. Whatever strength to be gotten by you to get up is from God. Whatever assistance you get is from God anyway, who's totally in charge of everything. But it's to tell you not to be so weak and not to be so dependent that you can't say, God, just help me. Give me 5 minutes. Then give me 3 minutes. 2 minutes. I'll get out of it. Don't say, Lord, I may as well just sit here and die right now because it's over. You don't want to do that. Just give me the strength and I will carry through and all will be well. Let us offer our thanks to God for being so kind and so merciful to all of us, and offer our prayers of thankfulness, offer our prayers that each day we will go closer to God, not just saying none to my ashram, but all the people all over the world, that they would look Godward and away from the world, that they will introspect, look within. God is there. God is here. God is near. The only thing is you can't see my light, the Lord said. Till you get rid of foolishness, to get rid of hostilities, get rid of desires, get rid of taking advantage, get rid of this idea of authority. You won't see my light. You won't see me. You won't be illumined. You won't become realized. You won't recognize me. You won't know me. You'll know my Maya that's going to live with you day and night, that's going to try to bring things to your understanding with the impression that it's me, when it's only the Maya speaking. It's only the Maya motivating. When God really is the motivator, that's who you want to see. That's who you want to be near. That's who you want to lead and guide your life. My prayer is everyone present here will introspect, go forth onward in the spiritual path, will look Godward to you for the guidance, the direction that they require in life, that they won't be misled by Maya. Maya can also very easily delude the human mind. I pray that you will guide the people, bring them far beyond salvation, bring them to the state of liberation, and beyond that even to self-realization, and let them go all the way to the highest realization.
We've witnessed this, the cross as an instrument of torture and a threat and phantom thread, weaving us all into complicity with what crosses us, what covers us, a shroud, an effigy. Effigy, the uneasy negotiation between shine and burnout, or between triumph and sabotage. It's bright and eternal, unfolding from the image to the light it carries, haloing black sound like a threat, her sound like a threat or a cross, the shredded synth or crimped 808 looped and imbricated, until the walls of noise crest in on themselves, forcing you to flee or writhe yourself free or join the ruins and become their immobile feast. Meanwhile, you are not on the ground. You are the mourner's pavement, hers and your own, your burrow into the root of the holographic radiance of riddance and her phantom. Slip into it as if skidding on ice and slick soles. In the club, we all dress up, trip and sync to its gutter music, a diaspora of fallen angelics regulated as a muse, as her, the beautiful one disassociating, the stolen tongues of salvation shifting from formless to rooted in your very own hijacked flesh, invasively wedged or withheld there like a stale, noxious air searching for the taper in a machined fog. A rave party augury displaced to mid-sized chapel, still life with closed listening, closer, and you're the woman who went underground, digging each grave of love its tunnel system through which the souls escape the body later, reassembled in effigy. And that is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Harmony. Now I want to introduce Aja Burrell Wood. Aja Burrell Wood is the managing director for Berklee's Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice. Originally from Detroit, Michigan, Wood is an ethnomusicologist, educator, and curator with a background in development and violin performance. She has taught courses on music, history, and culture at the City University of New York, City College, and Brooklyn College Conservatory of Music. Her work includes research on musical community among Black classical musicians, women in jazz, jazz in the digital era, music and civic engagement in Harlem, and other related genres of the African diaspora, such as blues, hip hop, soul, and West African traditions. She has curated performances for the Schoenberg Center for Research in Black Culture for their annual Women's Jazz Festival. She has also served as an arts presenting consultant and thought partner for Harlem Stage, Weeksville Heritage Center, Revive Music Group, the Sphinx organization, and currently serves on the board of the New Music USA. Please join me in welcoming Aja Burrell Wood.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I have just been having a very great day, and I think you have too. It's truly an honor to be here with all of you today as we continue to reflect on the profound legacy of Alice Coltrane, composer, harpist, keyboardist, and spiritual guide. I would like to thank the Hammer Museum, Shannon and team, and especially and deepest thanks to Erin, whose brilliant work has called us all here today to be in community, to be able to lift up the expansive genius and brilliance and artistry of Alice in a multitude of ways. So when I say I'm deeply and profoundly grateful, I mean it. So, I wanted to actually take you guys back a few years. In 2018, I had the distinct honor, I was so excited about this, of curating a special performance and celebration of Alice Coltrane at the Schomburg in Harlem. I was invited to be a guest curator for their Women in Jazz Festival, which they have every year. And wanted to make sure that we were celebrating her impact and legacy as an indelible artist and visionary whose work was both pioneering and continues, of course, to impact and influence music today. So here's the thing. While I was extremely excited and elated, you know, when you get that opportunity that you've always wanted and it's like, yes, and then you immediately go into the thud of overthink. And oh my gosh, wait, which way am I going to go? Because she is so, there's so much to consider, or so many perspectives, as we even have seen here today. But I was very lucky to be in conversation with my dear friend and sister, brilliant artist, harpist Brandy Younger. By the way, she says, hello, everybody. I had to give you guys my hello from her today. I decided to consider a reflection of legacy through the lens, actually, of her 1978 album, Transfiguration, and that's kind of what we're going to be moving through today. And also in that moment, it allowed me to curate this really wonderful performance where I was able to pull in exceptional and incredible musicians, also and composers. One of them also is here today, my dear sister Courtney Bryan. Hi. Also drummer Jonathan Blake and bassist Rashawn Carter, string players, violinist Kiera Fossey, and cellist Malcolm Parsons. We had a good time. And what was interesting too about this album is it just also happened to be, at that time, the 40th anniversary of this release. So it ended up being very timely. But this album, by the way, all of Alice Coltrane's albums are special. Like, let's be clear. I just want to talk about what I find special and interesting about this album. That it's now been 47 years since its release, and it signifies an important milestone in understanding her musical journey and spiritual transformation over time. I just want to note on this album, we'll have also includes in the rhythm section Reggie Workman, Roy Haynes, violins Jay Rawson, Murray Adler, Noel Pointer. I think that's also very interesting, and also given his work in Brooklyn and in community as a violinist. Sherwin Herbert, Michelle, Sita Coltrane, violas, Janice Ford, Pamela Goldsmith, cellos, Christina King, and Ray Kelley. Just want to uplift all the musicians and collaborators on this project. However, before I discuss this meditation that I'm here to bring to you today, a thought further, I would like to make sure that we also consider and try to understand and appreciate a context, or another context, if you will, for which Alice Coltrane, her life and work exists. In liner notes for The Revolution, The Intellectual Life of Black Feminist Sound, Daphne Brooks provides an important framework for considering the cultural work of Black women, as well as their contribution to modern popular music, culture, and sound. Brooks well notes that Black women have long been themselves. I want to say that again. Black women have long been themselves, fugitive thinkers, critics, and theorists of sound, while also having to contend with, exist in, and navigate a society that far too often excludes them from who gets to make culture and who gets to think and write about culture. In fact, this sets the conditions for a reality which Brooks identifies as a crisis in collective memory for the genius, artistry, and innovation of Black women. So, as I said, and I say again, I am grateful to be here today to celebrate and share on the life and work of Alice Coltrane. As Brooks rightfully and powerfully declares in her work, Black women music made by many and not just the exceptional few profoundly matter. And in Alice's own words, women have been held back and limited through the centuries. Creation could not have been rendered, not even considered, let alone be brought into manifestation without women. She is woman. She is principle, a powerful energy. She is first. I must also take this moment to share that I take exceptional and great pride in sharing on Alice Coltrane as a Black woman and also fellow Detroiter. Any Detroiters in the house, by the way? Okay, come on, we're insufferable. Listen, very proud, very, very prideful people, salt of the earth. I absolutely owe much of my musical life, when I think about it, career and journey, to the past she cleared before me, even before I understood that that's what was. Most recently, as having the great honor and distinct pleasure of working alongside Terry Lynn Carrington as the managing director of the Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice, for which Terry founded, by the way, in 2018. When I started in on talking about this special performance at Schaumburg, that would have been March 2018. I had no clue at that moment that only a few months later I would be taking on this role to be able to work alongside Terry Lynn Carrington as the artistic director at Berkeley. So I was in Harlem in March, and by August I was in Boston. And trying to eat some lobster rolls and kind of get acquainted as we were setting off to institution build. And also one of our most recent projects that we were so happy to be able to do, we published the new standards, 101 lead sheets by women jazz composers. And because there hadn't been one, it's a challenge to the canon. And it spans about 100 years, from Little Hart and Armstrong, Jerry Allen, to even some people who were actual students at Berkeley at that time of publishing. And it includes Alice Coltrane's Blue Nile. And it's been so wonderful to be walking around campuses, and even more so at festivals and jam sessions, and to be hearing that tune more and more and more every single year, because that's a part of the work too, literally just getting it out there and making it accessible. So with this, I offer my sonic reflection in hopes of making an earnest and meaningful deposit back into the collective memory. So, Transfiguration. Let's talk about it. Okay, I think I'm doing... Okay, there we go. All right. Transfiguration was Alice's last commercial recording before she took a 26-year break from public performance. I was deeply fascinated about this. Like, what is that? What is that time of life? What is she moving to, moving from? And actually, also interestingly enough, another full circle moment today. It was recorded, I'm assuming not too far from where we are, although I've never been, the Schomburg Hall at UCLA, right here in Los Angeles, California. But this wasn't a withdrawal from music itself, far from it. She deepened her devotion that she was already on a path for, and continued composing and performing for her community, notably at the Sai and Ashram she founded in the 80s. The break from the public jazz scene allowed her to focus on creating music, even more so as a spiritual practice. And I also want to consider Transfiguration, not only in this live performance in this album and as a part of her discography, but as a spiritual offering in and of itself, a metaphor and a method. So first, I'd like to listen to Prima, and we'll see if we have time for additional tunes, but I wanted to really focus on this one. Prima is a Sanskrit word meaning divine love. It's a perfect introduction, I believe, to what I want to discuss today, the idea of music as offering, and how Alice Coltrane comes to use sound as a medium to connect with the divine and in spirituality. So let's play a little bit here. And That would have been on the set list as well for our 2018 performance at Schaumburg, but I can listen to this all day. It's so pensive, it's so meditative, but let's get into it, because like I said, I believe that this tune in particular offers a chance for all of us to deep dive a little further into some of the things and possibilities that are happening here. So let's just consider transfiguration in general as a metaphor. Transfiguration quite literally means a change in form or appearance. It also stands as a powerful metaphor in spirituality. In particular, if anybody is or has had any type of proximity to the Christian tradition, you might have learned that transfiguration is the moment when Jesus reveals his divine nature to his disciples in radiant light. Playing the organ at services in Mount Olive Baptist Church from the age of 9, Alice indeed would have had proximity obviously to that tradition and framework as well. And I can just say again, in Detroit, Detroit is a very Black place, a very musical place, a very churchy place. So in a context like that, it's also almost unavoidable. But it's interesting what she's seeking to do here with that idea. In this case, though, Alice Coltrane seems to have adopted this concept into her 1978 live recording and performance, but actually and rather offered meaning and significance in her own deeply personal spiritual context by now, which would have also been long informed by Eastern traditions and music culture, yet still grounded in her musical beginnings, training, and, of course, her formidable artistry and musicianship as a jazz artist. For her, it seems transfiguration presents a radiant and divine revelation of herself to listeners and community, and a transformation of sound itself, from artistic self to spiritual self, from musical expression to a sacred offering. In the liner notes of Transfiguration, Alice writes, "Transfiguration transforms every musical moment from a mere expression of one's prowess and musical capabilities into an offering of love. I believe this shift from performance to offering is key, for it's not only an offering of technical skill and artistic expression for the sake of accomplishment, applause, acclaim. Transfiguration offers a space for the divine to enter through the music, and I wonder may have also helped her to further create space for herself, a space in her musical journey, in her life's journey, in her journey in grief, her spiritual journey, and to not have to separate any one of those journeys from the other, because they are not. It's a reconsideration of what music is and a reminder of what music can be for example, healing, a prayer and a commune with the divine, a pathway for elevation, and more. Through this lens, Transfiguration moves beyond a magnificent live performance, an iconic record. It's a sacred act, an act that has the ability to transform both the musician and the listener. So as we go further today, we explore together some of the ways that this transformation manifests and what we can learn from that. In terms of where devotion meets jazz as transformation, 2 questions that I'm just concerned with today, but there will be more, I'm sure, over time. How does this transformation manifest musically? And how does Alice's background in jazz help to shape this process? Alice Coltrane's musical voice, as we know, is shaped by her interests, training, and virtuosic gifts across gospel, classical, jazz. In particular, we know that she's influenced by bebop and studied with Bud Powell and the likes. However, after the death of her husband, John Coltrane, she moved even more intentionally into more expansive spiritual territory for which she already seemed to be on a path towards. She immersed herself in the practices of Indian classical music, especially the devotional music of the Bhakti tradition, while also constantly drawing from her roots in gospel and modal jazz. During the mid-1970s, prior to the release of Transfiguration, she had adopted the monastic name Turya Sangeetananda, which she translated as the Transcendental Lord's Highest Song of Bliss. Yeah. In this album, interestingly enough, she wrote the liner notes as Turya Sangeetananda. A transfiguration in and of itself, if you think about it again, a change of form or appearance, in name from her written liner notes from 1971 as Turiya Aparna for universal consciousness. So we can see it even in there. I think there's a whole study to be had just on Alice Coltrane's liner notes alone. In listening to the album, Transfiguration doesn't fit neatly into any one genre. In contrast, it presents a blending of traditions, jazz, Indian raga, gospel, and devotional music. It's all there. These forms seamlessly meet across time, geographic boundaries, and multiple diasporas. Some might categorize this as fusion. You can maybe say it that way, but to me, it seems beyond that concept. I'd argue that these forms, ideas, and approaches come together in an artistry and innovation that holds space where all of these can coexist in reverence and in her sonic and spiritual offering to the divine. Take what we just listened to, Prima, the track that we just heard. Its mood is meditative and its pace is slow, in contrast to other tunes on the record. Much like a chant, Alice's touch on the piano and on the keys is reverent, pensive, and deeply intentional, almost like it lifts up an offering of sound. The piece is also modal, characteristics of Alice's compositional voice and musicianship, influenced again by ragas and jazz improvisation. The rhythm section doesn't push here, not so forward aggressively, but seemingly grounds the prayer-like strings, and at times also interacts in call and response form, also in that oscillation, throughout the ensemble's interaction in the instrumentation. And the way that happens creates a soundscape that begins to feel more like a sacred ritual than a performance. But also here, I think it also offers us an opportunity to consider what Paul Gilroy puts forth in framework, in that the politics of transfiguration reveals the hidden internal fissures in the concept of modernity. Her use of silence and space, also hallmarks of Indian music, move powerfully in a way of kind of revealing those fissures. And in those fissures, breaths and presence of the sacred, transforming familiar jazz forms, transforms those from familiar jazz forms into an act of spiritual devotion. I mean that this is an improvisation for the sake of individual expression, which is valid, by the way, but more so a generative sonic space where the listener is invited to experience something divine. And so I'll begin to close here. So now, it's important to recognize that Transfiguration isn't only about what Alice played, how she played it, and why she played it. There's also an important opportunity to consider how we listen. And then, wait, there's more. How she invited us to listen. Transfiguration calls for active listening, deep listening, participatory listening, listening further and again, as listening is a practice in and of itself. She's reminding us of that. She asks us to listen differently, not only of the technical feats and mastery of the artist, but for the invocation of the sacred, transmission of spiritual vibrations from a mass consciousness. for mass consciousness. I am reminded of the way Sherry Tucker has long called for us to have big ears in listening for jazz and gender. As any jazz musician, student of jazz, lover of jazz knows that music itself requires big ears, that the music, jazz itself requires big ears. Here, I believe Transfiguration also calls for us to have big ears, but now for life force and spiritual energy. As Coltrane articulates in her liner notes, referring to the tune Leo. In fact, there are ways that the music of Transfiguration acts upon the listener. It offers the listener an opportunity to be transformed by sound, by the vibration, and by the intention behind it. This is what Alice is pointing to when she spoke of music as an offering not only to the audience, but to the divine. And perhaps to listen to Transfiguration in this way could also be a chance to participate in a spiritual practice yourself. We shift from merely hearing the music to feeling it deeply, to connecting with something greater than ourselves. Thus, in that context, Transfiguration can therefore become a kind of meditation, a prayer. Through that listening and that type of listening, we too undergo a form of transfiguration. That is a musical offering. Alice Coltrane once said, music, when it is an offering, becomes a kind of spiritual food, a medicine. And that's exactly what I believe Transfiguration offers us. A medicine for the spirit, a sacred and transformative space where both the music and the listener, the changer and the changed can meet, all while in community. With that, I invite everyone to spend time with this album if you haven't, to return to this album if it's been a while, and to keep listening even if you've been listening to it since 1978, back in the 1900s. I invite you to consider and reconsider the fullness of this sonic offering of Alice Coltrane completely and overall. Sonic offerings that stretch beyond the conventions of canon, genre, and standards, and maybe, just maybe, if we listen with open ears, open hearts, and open minds, with the same intention Alice had when she played, we have the chance, a greater chance, to learn and never forget again the brilliant ways her expansive sonicity can transfigure us as well. Thank you.
Alrighty, so we've come to our final lecture of the day. Right after this lecture, we'll have a performance in the galleries by Sine Wood, so please make your way up to the galleries after this. For our final lecture, I'd like to introduce Courtney Bryan. Bryan is a pianist and composer from New Orleans, Louisiana, and she's a 2023 MacArthur Fellow. She currently serves as composer in residence with Opera Philadelphia, and her work has been presented in a wide range of venues, including Carnegie Hall, Lincoln Center, Miller Theater, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Her compositions have been performed by the Louisiana Philharmonic Orchestra, Jacksonville Symphony Orchestra of St. Luke's, and American Composers Orchestra. Bryan holds a doctorate in composition from Columbia University, where she studied with George Lewis. She also holds degrees from Oberlin Conservatory and Rutgers University. Bryan completed postdoctoral studies in the Department of African American Studies at Princeton University, and she is currently the Alpert and Linda Mintz Professor of Music at Newcomb College and the School of Liberal Arts at Tulane University. Please join me in welcoming Courtney Bryan.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Aja mentioned, I mean, it's just been a phenomenal morning and afternoon. It's just so many ideas are floating, and I'm just really grateful for that. And I gave myself a challenge of not writing out my words, so hopefully I'll stay on topic. But I'm really flowing with all the conversations from today. it's really special to be here for this celebration of Alice Coltrane. Once I saw this wonderful exhibit was happening, I was like, okay, I gotta figure out when I make my trip to LA. And so when this came up, I'm glad to get to be here with all of you and celebrate the great Alice Coltrane. So I guess what I wanted to talk about, I like the idea of reflections because I was, there's so many ways to talk about her music, but I thought I would just kind of do it more like a very personal reflections of my own relationship with Alice Coltrane, who I've never met, in real life, but I feel very connected with through the music and through spirit. And growing up in New Orleans, I had my teachers. John Coltrane had that role, well, as he does for so many people. I'd always hear my teachers talking about when they first heard John Coltrane, like my teacher, Edward Kidd Jordan. And it was always these moments of like how life changed when you heard John Coltrane. And I always grew up with John Coltrane as one of my heroes. And it was much later when I feel like I knew about Alice Coltrane, but I feel like I learned about her when I was like a full-on adult. And I felt like I was late because I'm growing up as a woman in jazz and a pianist. So I felt like it was late, but actually it was right on time because I think sometimes when you're ready to learn certain things, like they say, like the teacher shows up. So I was a student at Columbia working on my doctorate, and it was actually, I did an album that was based on spirituals, and I shared it with my advisor, with George Lewis, and he noted, or he said that he could tell I was influenced by Alice Coltrane a lot. And I realized that I hadn't actually listened to a lot of her music yet, so that led me on a discovery. And yeah, I mean, I just was discovering her music, and at some point I came to one of her pieces. It was on YouTube. This is when the ashram music wasn't so like readily available, but there was a piece on YouTube that I'll play on the next slide. That I heard that was from her first ashram album, Tariya Sings, which she made in 1982. That's the year I was born. And it really just drew me in. I was like, what's happening to me? So it was like one of those moments. So I'll play some of that. But that kind of led me onto this whole, because I knew about her as pianist, as organist, as harpist, and then I was hearing this whole other body of music. So I was really fascinated by the ashram. And my good friend, Brandy Younger, who Aja mentioned, Brandy Younger and I really connected a lot. Well, we connected over being women in music, but we also had a love for Alice Coltrane, and it was great. Like, we'd always talk about her together. And so when I was really, when I was at Columbia, the Columbia Center for Jazz Studies invited Frania Berkman to give a talk when she had written the book on Alice Coltrane, Monument Eternal. And so all of us, by then I was already an Alice Coltrane head. So all of us got in touch. I remember I told Brandy this talk's going on. I told our friend Imani Uzuri. There was like a whole gathering where we showed up, and I got to meet Frania Berkman, and I was so inspired because I realized what studying her took, like the whole idea of the interdisciplinary, to do religious studies, how Frania Berkman learned about her through doing yoga first, and then she was learned about the music and just all kind of ways that people come to Alice Coltrane. Like they say, come to Jesus moments, and there's come to Alice Coltrane. So I met her, and I just had this idea because I was so inspired. I wanted to keep in touch with her and figure out learning from her. And it wasn't long after that Frania Berkman passed away. And I had her book, and so I was I started from there, and then I talked to Brandy, and I was like, I really want to visit the ashram. So she connected me with Radha Bhattacharya at the ashram, and that's when I went to visit. So by this time I graduated from Columbia, I was doing my postdoc at Princeton, and this became my project. So the first year I was there was 2014. I made a quick trip. It was a day-long trip to the ashram to meet with Radha, and just get to see the ashram and drink some water. And then I took the train up to San Francisco, and I saw the St. John Coltrane Church for the first time. So it was like a pilgrimage. I didn't call it that yet, but I think this was the start of a pilgrimage. And yeah, then I was like, I need to come back longer. So 2015 is when I took the selfie with Alice Coltrane with Swamini. I wanted to spend some time there. So it was in the December of 2015. I spent 2 weeks at the ashram. And this time I was kind of in a mind state, like I want to just kind of like take in the whole thing. I'm going to go back to that. Like, you know, thinking about the way of living there, like the clothing. I made sure I came with the right clothing, like fully clothed. I was not eating meat or drinking alcohol during that time. I know it's just 2 weeks, but still, it was like a it was still kind of like an adjustment. Like I'm just kind of getting into the whole, you know, like experience, and I really enjoyed it. It was a time because Rada noticed this with me. She says, because I said I went there with my like scholarly ambitions. I said I'm going to write an article on Alice Coltrane and her compositional process. I never did write the article, but it kind of turned into this other multi-year project, which I was like, oh, this is my version of what that was. It's still a very serious study of her work. I just saw it in a certain form. But I came there with my outline and everything. I had questions. I got to interview members of the ashram. What was I saying? Yeah, I wanted to come there, but Rada said, you're clearly looking for something. So definitely me going to the ashram, I think it was musically inspired, but it was definitely more, I think, on the spiritual side, which is very important to me, my life and my work. But I definitely went there on a spiritual search. And I'm just kind of, I put some of my words that I had when the New York Times has those 5 minutes why you love a certain musician. So I had a chance. It was Marcus Moore that time. I know other times it had been Gio Rusinello. But they invited me to write about her. And that's when you get that moment where you're like, how do I pick one song or like one piece or one moment of that piece? But the one, this is not the piece I picked. It's in another slide. But yeah, I was always thinking about like, how do you describe Alice Coltrane's music? Because it's not like something where you say relaxing. It's like when I thought like a deep tissue massage, you know, there's like a certain amount of pain. It's like it really like, it's like real therapy. And Aja, I think you mentioned that about like the healing side. And I know Alice Coltrane said about divine music has a curative virtue. So I found her music to be very healing. I found that when I got into her music, it wasn't just to study it, to perform it. I started to perform it later. But it was really like before, like I was someone who never liked to speak in front of people. I could play piano in front of like a bunch of people or write music for folks, but speaking in front of people made me nervous, and I was teaching. So there was a certain Alice Coltrane piece. It was Hare Krishna from, I gotta see which album, Universal Consciousness. And I would play that every time before I taught, and then I'd be ready. So it was just kind of like get my heartbeat at the right level. And so like I would kind of use her music in that way, you know, like someone might drink chamomile tea or something, or maybe other vices, but it was like a healthy vice. So I would like listen to her music, and that's how I learned a lot about. So Taria Sings, I started with that, and this is the piece I was mentioning that I first heard. The part where she drops to the low pedal along the way on the organ, it's just like, oh my God, it's like heavens open up. But I feel like hearing her voice did something for me. It's something about her voice. As Harmony Holiday was playing her voice, I was thinking about that too. It's like, it's all in the music through all the instruments, but something about hearing her voice really explains a lot about her spirit. But yeah, Divine Songs, a lot of the pieces from that, Brandy and I played together. I played in different ways. Infinite Chance and Glorious Chance, different albums that have been of interest to me. So, can you say this with me? We'll say it a few times. May there be peace and love and perfection throughout all creation, O God. May there be peace and love and perfection throughout all creation, O God. May there be peace and love and perfection throughout all creation, oh God. Thanks so much. Yeah, sometimes I start my concerts with that saying. It was John Coltrane's voice on Alice Coltrane's album, or The Peace, the Sun. What album was it? I'm sorry, I'm like, but The Peace, the Sun. So this is Sai Nantam Ashram. This was the Anna Daruth tree. Anna Daruth, another name for John Coltrane. So that was a place to sit and just like have that sort of peace. And you'll see just some of my homemade photos. This is stuff I just kind of kept in my own files for a while. But I think like since the ashram is no longer presently there, like when it burned down, I thought about these photos and of course all the wonderful footage that Cauleen Smith has in her films of that really special moment, you know, of the ashram. And so having this footage, and for me, it's just been like something I look at every now and then just to remember the kind of peace I felt there. And I'm happy to like kind of show them. So there's the mandir. And I know at the bookstore, I got all the books I could get. So I have like the Divine Revelations and the various books. Monument Eternal, I've read several times. And as everybody's been talking about today, just learning about the spiritual tests and the tapas that she went through. And this was a profound experience because there's one thing to like have the recordings, but the very first time I visited in 2014, Rada invited me to play on Alice Coltrane's organ, which was a whole thing. So I said yes, and I was just like, oh wow. So I thought about a conversation I had with Jerry Allen once. Because the first time I had a chance to play something for Jerry Allen, I played a spiritual. It was my arrangement of Wade in the Water. And then we had a whole conversation later. She was saying, I liked it, that's what you chose. She said how she often opens up her concerts with a spiritual, and it's important to honor the ancestors. And I know that Alice Coltrane recorded I Want Jesus to Walk With Me. And so that's what I played on the organ. So you see the organ in this. So this is where she would sit and play and also lead I sing service. I'm in a Christian context, but she would lead the service from here, and here's where we would sit. The women would sit on this side, and the men sat over here. And when I was there for the other time, we had the two church services like each Sunday, and just kind of actually singing the pieces that I had heard, and some of them I hadn't heard before. But we all had the hymnal that was in Sanskrit, but it also had like the phonetic spelling, so you could sing along. And it was just like when you if you're in New Orleans and you go to Congo Square on a Sunday, you don't sit and observe. Like if you're there, you have something to do. So someone will hand you some like hand percussion or something to do. So it's the same thing there. Like you don't just sit there and observe, like you're part of it. And I remember Sister Shankari Adams like passing me tambourine or different instruments to play. So it was like very spirited music. And I was like, oh, I really can imagine, you know. It's like Alice Coltrane wasn't there physically, but it felt like she was. And a weird picture of myself. But anyway, here's me with Radha Vadavasena. And just the time with the ashram community was just so amazing because part of it was asking all these questions about Alice Coltrane or learning about the Vedantic tradition. But it was also like we went to go sing Christmas carols at a nursing home. And so that was a big part of the whole thing, you know, like once, and I'm a church person. So, you know, it's like there's like the parts that are part of the official thing, and then you do these other things together. So I remember we went, and this is members of the Coltrane family. And here's Sister Shankari Adams, who I mentioned, who also wrote a book on Alice Coltrane. But she was sharing things with me about like how Alice Coltrane could communicate with non-human forms. Like she could communicate with like butterflies and other life forms, or how she would see things happening ahead of time, like kind of tell people like, don't take this road, you know, today. And it kind of like, I think that's where my article process kind of got paused, because it was like understanding what it meant for someone to be God realized. And it was explained to me and how she communicated with God. And she talked about that in the film that y'all showed. Her communication with God, where she and God were one. And it just like, it doesn't mean it can't be written about, but I felt like for me, I had to kind of approach it another way, which was through just taking in some of her music techniques, which I'll demonstrate some that I found really important, but to me. but also just understanding who she was as a spiritual being. And this is the room, and that was her chorg I got to practice on. So that was super cool. But yeah, I used that time to just kind of catch up on different reading, to slow down from a lot of distractions online and just kind of meditate. So this is a piece I wrote about in the New York Times one, Kashava Murahara. This was on Divine Songs. And I had to pick one moment, and I was thinking, I mean, this is the way I described it, but I'll play the example. And I just feel like it feels like the ideal way to live a life, the way this sounds. So I'll play the ending of this. I kind of refer to it as the ascent because now I use it in my music, and I'll play how I've interpreted this next. Here's Alice Coltrane. And of course, there's the minutes of it building up. I think one thing I found in her music is just the importance of the repetition along the way until it builds up to a moment like that. But I just want to show technically how this is inspired by music. There's a piece that I was commissioned to write in response to the piece Strange Fruit. And I wrote a piece called Elegy. And at the ending of it, I was picturing spirits making their ascent. And so here's how I interpreted that technique of hers. Yeah, so different instruments and different effects, but definitely like, okay, this is a very effective technique that she did with the synthesizer, and how do I create that with strings and piano. And so the influence of the vamp, so I feel like a lot of music I play at church, there is this thing where you have, the music that continues and it could build up to something ecstatic, or it could be the quiet meditation. But I'm thinking about a lot of her music, but one is Rama Rama. This is a piece that Brandy and I have performed a lot together. Brandy has her own version, but let me play a little bit of this.
Rama
but I'm moving on. I'm tired of losing love, but I'm moving on. I'm tired of losing love, but I'm moving on.
So while there's a lot of music that can have that sort of effect, I think because my mind had been so much on her, there was during the pandemic time, I was getting more into like just the idea of like having these things that would go over a longer time. And one of those pieces I created then was called Blessed. So I just put a little bit of that. Oops.
Blessed are you. Blessed are you.
So I'll pause. I mean, it goes over a longer period of time. But I always think about the low end of the piano too, like Aja, when you played the prima, just like that sound, specific things with piano. So I'm gonna also just think about like when I teach about Alice Coltrane, I'll of course include as an introduction Journey and Satchidananda, classic, never. It's always fresh, always always beautiful, profound. And I like to just give them additional listening because I was like, oh, it's interesting to hear how a certain idea that she revisited at different points of her life shows the different places, not just where she was musically, but where she was spiritually and how that comes out. So I just think of this as like how her music was. There's all these different chapters, and I feel like us Alice Coltrane heads when we meet each other. It's not only a question like how did you come to her, like was it through the music or the spirituality, but even if it's through the music, it's like, oh wait, which album is like your favorite, or what stage of Alice Coltrane? For many of us, it's like all of it, but I think that I like seeing this connection that something like Journey and Satchidananda reflects like the kind of like the story of her life and her recording career and into the ashram, and so. Detroit all the way. So before the beat drops. But so then later years with Galaxy and Satchidananda. Beautiful string writing, and especially when she does that single line string writing, which feels like chanting. And then we have the one from Glorious Chants, one of her later ashram albums where you hear it sung. Beautiful extended version. And I guess I just end with this whole Alice Coltrane community. I mean, that's what this exhibit is doing and today's gathering. But I just love the way Alice Coltrane brings people together. And I mentioned that the book, The Frying Berkman, but also here's a back in the day picture of me and Brandy first met. But yeah, I remember us just talking about Alice Coltrane, and over the years, I know she introduced me to like Ravi Coltrane, and this was like when the compilation album came out a few years ago, and there was a big event in New York that we did. So we had the ashram singers, and this is post the ashram. Yeah, with ashram burning down, but it's like the culture, it continues where the ashram singers have been bringing it around, and Michelle Coltrane, and so they were sharing this music in one hall, and Ravi, we had the band where we were playing, and I remember that journey in Satchitananda. It was like 10 minutes before the beat dropped, so it was just like this whole build up, and it was an amazing spiritual experience. This was recently in Detroit where. Ravi Coltrane mentioned this was the first time that some of his mother's music with the strings had been played live, like with orchestra, because it was in the the studio with the strings, and so it was a big deal to have the string orchestra and the band and Reggie Workman and everyone, and Michelle Coltrane, Ravi, and here's Radha Bhattacharya. So yeah, just the way she brings us together as community, and musically inspiring. I mean, all of those who have been part of this, Flying Lotus and her family, and just generations who are inspired by the music. I mean, the music remains very like cutting edge today, and then spiritually, like knowing and just to experience the idea of to me, experience the ashram just gave me an insight into something that I have not experienced too much. I mean, the other time I experienced is with visiting my cousin, Erna Bradber, Jamaican writer. She has a place called Black Space that she's had since the 1980s. And to experience that is, once again, where she owns this land and makes it available for people to come and explore themselves culturally and learn and meet one another. And I mean, more than that, but it's just the idea of this space created by Alice Coltrane where someone could, even if it's just 2 weeks of your life that you spent there, it could like really dramatically shift how you experience like freedom and spirituality. So that's my presentation. I kind of took a while. I mean, I don't know if everybody had any questions, or is there time to, okay, all right, thank you.
And we're closing. I just want to thank everyone here for being with us today. And I really want to emphasize that to this day, there's not a lot of scholarship on Alice Coltrane. So today feels historical in bringing together brilliant and incredible colleagues who are really, I think, spearheading this legacy building of Alice and bringing her more and more into society. So thank you all for your incredible work and presentations today. I also want to thank Naya for being our incredible master of ceremonies. And a major shout out to Shannon, our public programs team, and our tech team up there making all these PowerPoints look so beautiful. Thank you. Before we close out, we actually have a really special treat. We have really incredible, talented colleagues here at the Hammer. Two of them are Gabriel Noguez and Sean Rowry, and they've created 4 incredible short artist profiles on 4 of the artists in the show. So we're just going to watch those as a closer. And then as soon as that ends, we're going to head up to the galleries and queue in line right in front of the galleries for an incredible performance by one of the artists in the exhibition, Sine Woods. As a reminder, the show closes on Sunday. So if any of your friends were like, oh, I got to see that thing, just get them to the West Side. It's now or never. And also as a reminder, we have some really incredible merch and a deeply researched catalog that we created for this exhibition in our bookstore. And today, in honor of the symposium, we are keeping the galleries open until 7 p.m. So enjoy the videos, enjoy the performance, enjoy the exhibition, and Om Shanti.
My name is Cauleen Smith, and the film that I have in this exhibit is called Pilgrim. Pilgrim is a film that was made from lots of 16mm mostly film that I took while I was visiting different sites where utopias happened. But the heart of the film was actually filmed beautifully in 4K by my friend Arthur Jaffa, AJ, and it centers around the ashram and mandir that once stood in Calabasas, California, where Alice Coltrane or Swamini Turiya shared her teachings and music. So the film Pilgrim begins just with this image of this organ that's encased in acrylic and dust, the sunlight shooting through the dust as it kind of falls around it. Couldn't access it or play it, and it was a revered object. It's so interesting, like one of the first records that really got me enthralled by her is called Eternity, and on that song, I don't know the title of the song, but chanted over and over again is California. It seems to be a message that she's sending and receiving about having to go west to California, and I was really intrigued with that. I loved these world-building musicians who don't just do music, but they are placemakers and like have ensembles of people with them thinking the same thing they think, or thinking with them about ideas. When the purpose of your music is so large that it has to be enacted through like place and with other people. It can't just be you writing or composing. It has to be enacted by lots of other people. Lots of other people have to contribute. I love that idea.
My personal experience in meditation brought me face to face with God, hand in hand, heart to heart, and almost to the point He was me and I was Him. We were just us.
For me, a meditation practice is a practice of listening, of calming the mind, of being present in this moment. It's a process of becoming empty. I feel with this piece in particular, because I was studying Swamini so intensely, was that I wanted it to be devotional. My name is Sine Woods, and the work is called On This Day in Meditation.
wade in the water. God's gonna trouble them
The title came actually before the editing began. It was something that Swamini Turiya Sangeetananda writes in Divine Revelations often. In a lot of her entries, she writes, on this day in meditation, or on this fine day in meditation. And so I knew that I wanted to create a meditation practice for myself in making this work. And I wanted to understand what it meant to meditate through her teachings, through her work, through her devotees, through God, through the spirits, through my ancestors. And initially it was a working title, but it has become the title because I feel like it is meant to be on this day in meditation. When I was sitting with what this work needed to be or how it needed to evolve, what came to me is that I needed to work with a thermal camera. So some of the footage that you're experiencing is from footage from a thermal camera where it has like these dense reds. Yeah, it was meant to articulate a sensation of energy. It's measuring the heat in the body. But it was important for me to capture energy. There's various ways one can meditate, but for me, meditation is the practice of calming the mind so that the body, the vessel, can be available to spirit or to serve through the spirits, through the ancestors, through God.
Your earth, the astral worlds, the etheric worlds, the causal worlds, rest in me, not I in them.
My name is Star Feliz, and the name of my piece is Siren of Oblivion. Siren of Oblivion is a multimedia sculpture constructed with concrete building materials, natural earth pigments, video and sound elements that channel the primordial seas and Ethernet cables that reach towards the sky. The symbols I use are mined from various sources like subconscious memory, archives, the internet, and they're also connected to my plant spirit channeling practice as an herbalist, energy healer, and diviner in the Afro-Indigenous traditions. The symbol on the siren resembles a hieroglyph of a flower that might have been etched into a cave wall. The red tones in the pigment reference the protective power that anato seeds have on the skin. I study and work with sound as a frequency, a wave, a vibration, and embedded within the heart of the instrument are vocal echoes and resonances in the dark primordial waters, viewed from a monitor, powered by a mini computer and tentacle-like Ethernet cables. The composition features my own vocalizations, 20 Hz finback whale sounds, and the book, The Sibylline Oracles, transcribed into sonic glitches via audio editing software. Trance states are monumental in the creation of culture and the evolution of human consciousness, and this amnesia of ancient memory is something the siren is pointing to. During one of the darkest periods of my life, I was listening to Cauleen Smith on repeat, one of my favorite Alice Coltrane songs. And I remember seeing and feeling these neon green celestial beings healing my very cells by strumming the strands of my DNA like an instrument. The many experiences of that night forever transformed me and literally gave me new life. When Erin approached me about the show, it felt incredibly aligned. In addition to my interests in history, ecology, and technology, I also pulled from some of my childhood challenges of almost drowning in the sea and adapting my voice despite intense stutters that rendered me mostly silent. These experiences brought me closer to my own direct way of communicating with the divine forces of the universe, and normalized for me the everydayness of ecstatic conversations with God. Alice's work touches deeply into the heart, where divinity resides, and her life is a testament that freedom is possible. Thank you. Swamini Turiya Sachitananda.
Now let us take this opportunity to meditate upon the mercies of God. Meditation heals a broken heart and spirit. Through the effectiveness of meditation, one's heart and spirit can be uplifted unto the highest realms of divine consciousness and ultimately onward to liberation and realization in God. Sit back now, if you will, and meditate upon the mercies of God.
I think in a lot of spiritual practices, there's always a sort of transitional space that you have to enter for you to devote yourself to your practice. My name is Giovanna Gonzalez, and my piece is called Beneath the Sun Lies the Wisdom Eye. I did a lot of research on Alice Coltrane. You know, like I listened to her a lot, and of course I'm a huge fan and everything, but just thinking about the intimate spaces that she had that fostered a lot of her creativity and spiritual journey, it kind of really started just doing a lot of like deep diving, looking at their house that her and John Coltrane shared together, the ashram. And some of the like major components that I was interested in was both thinking about the domestic space as a space of nurturing and creativity, and also the space of the ashram as like this spiritual center for her and her community that she was building, and wanting to highlight those things into the installation. The stained glass that is at the top of the installation is inspired by the stained glass piece that was inside of their house, which Alice had designed. The one that was in their house was a circle that was broken up into 8 parts, and it was the wall that shared the living room space and the meditation room. And in the living room, there was also the piano, so it was also the place in which they made music. And I found it really interesting as like this window between these two spaces that were obviously, you know, very important for her. And then I just kind of read into the possible reasons why she made it a circle and why it was 8 parts. And I referred to it as like the moon phases. And then the color orange is quite obvious at this point. You know, referring to Alice herself as this color that she chose to wear for the remaining of her life. So that for me was like a must kind of have for this piece. Yeah. The title of the installation is Beneath the Sun Lies the Wisdom Eye. And I made this title from thinking about 2 songs. One is called The Sun, which is a song that Alice and John Coltrane made together. And the other one is A Wisdom Eye, which is one that Alice made after John passed away. Kind of combining those 2 titles together, the transition that she experienced in her life of togetherness with John and then the separation, and that being a part of her spiritual journey.
I feel that this is the way that I had to go in life, because I accept the music from him. You know, I accept the things that he did, and it seems to be exactly what I want to do, because there's so many things that he did in music I would have done the same way myself. It was always, when he played, that expression that came out of him was really what was inside. You know, whatever was real, whatever was truth, this is what came out of John when he played.